bringing you the 2020 NFL Draft, and sitting alongside my co-host Dave Mogensen. Dave, how you doing tonight?
Doing great, Travis.
We are looking forward to bringing you all the NFL Draft action virtually, which kind of interesting. Every single person, fan, personnel, executive, coaching staff, scouts, they're all doing exactly what we're doing, which is following online virtually. Kind of interesting. That's the way the landscape goes at this time. Let's go ahead and get things started here. We are about halfway through the first round, Dave. What are the surprises to you based on the picks 1 through 15?
I think the first 10 even had some surprises right away. After all that smoke for the first, second, and third pick possibly getting traded away, ended up being what everybody thought it was going to be. Right, those top three picks is what everybody kind of said it was going to be for weeks and weeks and months and months. The fourth pick was a little bit of a toss up, right? If you followed along the last couple of weeks, the Giants have been leaning towards offensive line. A lot of people thought they were going to go Isaiah Simmons there, but they ended up going with the offensive tackle. And then there's been tons of smoke from Miami of they're going to take Herbert, they're going to take somebody else, they're going to trade out of that, they're going to trade up to get somebody, and then they take Tua, the pick that they've been connected to since the day after the college football season, right? So those first five picks ended up being pretty similar to what people had set, even though all that smoke's been going through. And then this last 10 picks up to the 15th, we've had all kinds of crazy stuff happen. We just saw the Tampa Bay trade up one spot to get Tristan Wirfs out of Iowa, offensive tackle, to help protect Brady, which means to tell you that there was somebody else trying to trade up into that spot, possibly to take Wirfs, possibly to take whoever. I'm sure San Francisco didn't tell them who else they're going to take. For all we know, that was the Packers trying to trade up to get one of the wideouts on the board. So I think we jumped in at a good time, and it's going to get a little crazier here until we get to the Packers pick.
Yeah, interesting perspective. We had a little bit of a run on offensive tackles, starting off with Jedrick Wills, the big bookend from Alabama to Cleveland. We talked about Mekhi Becton yesterday on our draft pre-show. Obviously, he has some off-the-field concerns, but he's pretty viable at the left tackle spot. You'd think he'd be plug and play there coming out of Louisville. And Tristan Wirfs from Iowa, we know a little bit about him being from the Big Ten. I felt that those three guys are probably a little bit too far ahead on the board for Green Bay to have a serious amount of consideration, given the kind of capital they'd have to give up to make that pick, right? Being at 130, you want to move down into the early or mid-teens in this draft, in the high end of the first round, you're going to have to give up a haul to get it. So I'm thinking, just given the depth at that position and offensive line and also wide receiver, maybe we'll see Green Bay flirt with the idea of moving up a couple of spots. Brian Gutekunst is not afraid to do that, as we've seen in his first couple of drafts as a general manager. So kind of interesting to see where that takes us as we get closer to the beginning of the early 20s and the last couple of teen picks here in the NFL draft. Who, to you, in terms of best available player, somebody that we'd be looking at that Green Bay might potentially be interested in? Is it a wide receiver? We haven't seen any impact linebackers come off the board after Isaiah Simmons of Clemson. Maybe Kenneth Murray is the guy from Oklahoma. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you got three guys, maybe four guys at the pack. I would think the Packers probably have high on their list. At wideout, you still have CeCe Lamb. He's one of the top guys in the draft coming out of Oklahoma. He's still there. He's kind of fallen. People were thinking about him being possibly the first guy taken. He's obviously wasn't the first receiver taken. And then from linebacker, you've got Murray and Patrick Queen still there. So Simmons is that little bit jack of all trade, right, where Murray and Queen are the true inside linebackers, although they are really athletic guys. So both of them still there as a possibility. And then from we did have that run on offensive tackles, but Josh Jones from Houston's still there. So you do have four guys that I think the Packers have kind of been linked to, and guys that are highly interested in them that they could be moving up here in the end of this round.
Right. And we do see now, as we take a look at our board, that the San Francisco 49ers, in fact, drafted Kinlaw, the defensive tackle from South Carolina, and it was Denver that picked up Jerry Jeudy, the wide receiver from Alabama. So interesting selection there on that end.
Yeah, definitely. So with Jeudy gone, that makes Lamb the highest rated receiver on most everybody's boards available. Some of those other guys that we talked about yesterday are still out there, but they're not guys the Packers are probably going to trade up for. So it does a couple things. It either puts it in a position where with these guys falling, the Packers have a really good shot of getting one of those other guys, maybe it's Chenault or it's the guy out of Arizona State or whoever it is at 30 and not have to move at all, or they jump up ahead and grab one of those linebackers if they grab Lamb.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Do you think Laviska Shenault, the wide receiver from Colorado, who has his own set of issues in terms of being available and healthy, do you think he's a guy that they would consider if they decide to stay put at the 30th pick?
Yeah, I definitely think that they are. If they stay at 30, as it's going now, I think those second tier of wide receivers, most of those guys will most likely be available. If you look at who's between the Packers and their pick as far as other teams, there's not a lot of teams that are probably going to target a wide receiver. There's some talk of Atlanta maybe looking at that, but then you don't go back to maybe Minnesota taking one to help replace Diggs, who they traded over to Buffalo. So I think there's probably only one or two teams between now and 30 that are really targeting a wide receiver. Obviously, if somebody like Lamb falls into somebody's lap at 22, or maybe the Patriots at 23, and he falls into the lap there, they might take
Right.
him. But I think the Packers are in a really good position right now to grab a guy who might not want to have been those A1s, but a guy that the Packers have targeted as being available at 30.
Yeah, agreed. And Steven Grossuch, who is watching the draft here with Double Coverage Radio's podcast coverage, he writes in, I'm so used to watching Ted pick that I'm still expecting the pack to trade back. Excited to see who they're going to take and what they're going to do. Yeah, again, I think Steve, thanks for the comment. I think the big thing is the potential of the whole scenario, right? There's sort of a sexy feel to trading up, and that's what a lot of fans are looking for. I think if the value is there, it's something that maybe they would want to very seriously consider. So, Stephen, thanks for the comment, and thanks for tuning into the show tonight. So, at number 30 in the first round or early in the second round, tonight it's all about round one and prime time. What kind of splash pick do you think Green Bay could make to really fill in the gaps and maybe, they're one or two pieces away from potentially contending for a Super Bowl bid? If you're the general manager, if you're Dave Mogensen making the pick here for Green Bay, are you very realistically thinking about trading up into the round, or would you think about moving back? What would your move be, Dave?
I think with Lamb out there, the Packers have had an issue for the last couple of years with wide receivers. They got all these low round guys and undrafted guys. They're looking for somebody to come in who's explosive, who can help pull some coverage away for Devontae Adams. You're sitting there with Miami at 18, who has a high probability of being interested in possibly moving back a little bit, collecting some more picks. And that's a team that I probably am on the phones with right now, hoping that Lamb falls. If it gets to 18 and Lamb's still there, that's a good team. Them at 18 or even Oakland at 19 are two teams that already had a first round pick, might be interested in trading back, grabbing a couple more picks this round, swapping those for the 30th pick, letting the Packers go up and get Lamb.
Absolutely. I think those are all great potential scenarios. Speaking of potential scenarios, Dave and I did a coin flip prior to the show, and we're going to talk a little bit about our all-time top four Packer players ever. And what was the determining factor in this scenario? It was we didn't really factor in how they fared in their career. It was more about the hype of the draft pick and or how it was kind of coming in. And Dave, let's take a look at your top four all-time Packer picks. Love this list. Maybe take us through what your thoughts were behind this top group of four.
Yeah, so when you asked me what were the four picks that I can remember that were guys that I was really excited about when they picked them, right? And some of these guys didn't pan out. Really, the only one who panned out to what you thought would be Aaron Rodgers, right? So when Aaron Rodgers was picked in '05, I was really excited about it. So I'm like, you got a guy who should have probably been the first pick in the draft, fall all the way down to where he did, 24, and the Packers were able to grab him. Favre was getting to the end of his career. We all know how that turned out, right? Now the Packers have back Hall of Famers. I know a lot of people were pissed off about that pick at the time,
Right.
but I was really excited about it. The next year, too, A.J. Hawk. Who wasn't excited about A.J. Hawk, right? He had all the glory from Ohio State, and he was like one of the best players in the draft. The Packers get him really early. I mean, he had a really good career, like a really, really good career. He's probably going to be a Packers Hall of Famer. But with all the expectations laid on him, people are expecting NFL Hall of Fame career. So maybe people are saying AJ Hawk didn't have a great career, right? And then the other
Right.
two are kind of like total weird ones that I liked. I was a huge LaShawn Johnson fan. I don't know why. In the early '90s, he was at Northern Illinois. I
Yep.
had at that time I had no connection. There's the Elkhorn connection to Northern Illinois because Todd Galani and Scott Weddich went there. But that was before that. For some reason, I remember seeing him on on ESPN. I'm like, LaShawn Johnson's awesome. He's going to kill it in the NFL. And the
Right.
Packers drafted him. I'm like, yes, I just kind of become a Packers fan around that time. Born in Chicago, we go through that story in another show, but we kind of
Sure.
became a Packers fan around there. And I'm like, LaShawn Johnson's going to kill it in the NFL. And then Torrance Marshall, I thought was an awesome pick. Sooner fan. I'm been a big Sooner fan since the '80s. Barry Switzer, Brian Bosworth. So when they took Torrance Marshall in '01, I was like, this is the guy I was telling everybody. This is the dude. He's going to come in. He's going to kill it middle linebacker. He's going to be a big thumper. And he just didn't pan out for whatever reason, right? He's a good athlete, did a lot of good stuff. Who knows why he didn't pan out? We weren't there. But those are the four guys that when you ask me that question, I'm like, these are the four dudes that I was the most excited about when they got the Packers
Right.
picked.
Yeah, little trivia. LaShawn Johnson is one of only four players in the modern era to rush for 215 yards. He did it as a member of the Arizona Cardinals in 1997. So,
He was a
great
stud.
list.
I don't know why he didn't stick and why he didn't make it in the NFL, but he was a really good football player.
Yeah, he did. He did. He actually finished out his professional career in 1999-2000 with the Chicago Enforcers of the XFL.
XFL, first run,
So,
XFL, nice.
great pick. Let's go over my top four. Well, you got a couple of minutes here. We're working our way through the beginning of the first half of round one of the NFL draft. The Atlanta Falcons seemingly taking all 10 minutes to make their selection virtually. Maybe Arthur Blank's computer froze for the Falcons. In the meantime, let's talk about my top four. And there they are. We got number one player of all time would be Travis Jervey coming out of the Citadel in 1995. I know it says '05. 1995 was the pick. I thought potentially a guy that, like LaShawn Johnson, maybe could have an effective pro career. He did make a Pro Bowl in 1998, and he won a Super Bowl championship in 1996, backing up Edgar Bennett on that Super Bowl team in Green Bay. So another guy, Nick Barnett, was a first rounder for Green Bay in 2003, and he had over 1,000 tackles in his career. So he's another guy that, like AJ Hawk, had that pedigree, although not a top five pick. I think, correct me if I'm wrong. There's probably a lot of fans who maybe felt like, AJ Hawk would have been a little bit more palatable had he been drafted at 15 or later in the first round, right? But because he's taken, in the top 5 or 6 picks, and he's not a, consistent all pro. People think of, in today's era, Luke Kuechly is the guy. You want that mold of a guy who's going to be rangy, 150 combined tackles, splash plays, just, the highlight reel stuff, and Hawk just didn't have it. Nick Barnett was a guy to me that was just a real workman-like linebacker, had a great solid career, won a Super Bowl with Green Bay, obviously in 2010. And then we got Robert Ferguson, second round pick in 2001 out of Texas A&M. Never did quite pan out. He's one of those receivers. There's a lengthy list of guys not named Jordy Nelson, Donald Driver, Randall Cobb, Devontae Adams in the second round. He's kind of the outlier, right? He's the asterisk. If you look at Wikipedia, never quite coming to fruition there with Green Bay. And then tight end Jermichael Finley, drafted out of Texas in the third round in 2008. I thought almost certainly he was going to help this offense sort of become next level good. He had a couple of great seasons, and in some sense statistically, but I think people remember him now for sitting out the Super Bowl 45, and then for his sort of enigmatic behavior with the team since he's been retired. But again, I thought Jermichael Finley was kind of that guy. He's 6'5". He runs a 4.5 40. Didn't quite pan out the way that we thought it would from that perspective. So let's go ahead and recap a couple of the latest picks here in the NFL draft. The Atlanta Falcons selected AJ Terrell, a cornerback out of Clemson. So he's a guy that I didn't have anywhere near my top 15, 16 picks in the first round, especially in a deeper secondary class. What's your take on Atlanta going secondary? I know they just released a couple of players that have been there for a number of years in their secondary. What do you feel about that pick, Dave?
Yeah, I think the one of the unique things about the draft and the fun things about the draft is there's professionals, right? And every team has tons of scouts and football executives and general managers and all that, and football operations guys and the coaches that put in way more time than even all the draft experts and things like that. And they try to find guys that fit their system that aren't necessarily regularly figured as top 20 guys or things like that. So I think AJ Terrell probably falls into that category for Atlanta. Obviously, coming from a great program at Clemson, so guys that have come from Clemson have been pretty successful. He's a big, long guy, 6'1", almost 200 pounds. So that's the corner that the NFL is trending to, right? Those long corners, long arm guys. So he fits that mold. Athletic, played at Clemson, so played against the best competition, played in the big bowl games, played in front of a lot of people. and he probably fits what Atlanta's looking to do, and he has all the measurables that go in there.
Yeah, again, if what's the theme of the draft? We talked about this last night. I'm a purist. If you like a guy and you want him, you got to go get him. Obviously, Atlanta felt that they needed to overhaul their secondary. They definitely made a pick there with Terrell, who's a solid player coming out of the SEC, facing great competition on Clemson, won a national championship. Let's take a quick comment on the stream for the show from Todd Galani, the new varsity head football coach at Elkhorn Area High School. He's also a NIU, Northern Illinois Husky himself, playing there in the early 2000s, starting at center. He says LaShawn Johnson, NIU baby. That predates Todd Galani's tenure down there in NIU. Thanks for the commentary, Todd, and we'll get you on the show again. Thanks for watching and participating tonight. Northern Illinois, a pipeline school there at the border of Illinois and Wisconsin. Let's talk a little bit more about Brian Gutekunst and the potential to trade back. I know everybody says, is he going to trade up in this draft? How is Green Bay going to make a splash play? What happens in this scenario if you're a fan and we're sitting there at 130? Let's say Green Bay has not made a pick, and all of a sudden we trade back into the second round again. What if a potential splash player like Jonathan Taylor is sitting there at 130, or Zach Bond, the linebacker from Wisconsin as well? How are you feeling if you're a Badger and Packer fan? Is it TJ Watt 2.0? Take us through that scenario, Dave.
Yeah, I think I knew you're going to bring up TJ Watt. I think you're still a little bit salty about that one, Travis. And then a lot of people, Packer fans, are salty about that one. Kevin King's been a good player, but TJ Watt's been kind of an all-pro level player, and that's been an issue with Packer fans. So I think if we're getting to 30 right now, there's two really good top receivers that we didn't think would be around here at 17, 18, and Lamb and Justin Jefferson are out there. Both the top inside linebackers and Murray and Queen are out there. So if you don't see the Packers trade up and those guys they make a run and those guys are all gone by 30, there's one name out there that's real that I think is going to be somebody that if he's there at 30 might draw people to trade up. And that's Jordan Love. So if Jordan Love's still there at 30, like I said yesterday, I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers think long and hard about him. But that's a guy that people are probably going to try to trade up for and get back into the first round and grab him. And the Packers at that point, if their top targets are gone, they're into that secondary market of guys, and they got 4 or 5 guys there. They can drop into the early second round, have 2 second-round picks. It's a high probability if there's somebody like Jordan Love is there available, they can go out and do that.
Yeah, I love the potential. Obviously, as we said, that the draft is probably a crapshoot, 50-50 for most of these picks, whether or not they pan out. If you're drafting that slot in the back of the first round, you obviously want to get as much quality as you can. Let's throw a real quick question out to the viewers here on our show. Who do you want the Packers to draft tonight? Go ahead and throw us a comment, and we will discuss it live on the show here on Facebook. You're watching Double Coverage Radio's presentation of the NFL Draft 2020 and Green Bay Packers coverage. The other thing I want to just real quick touch on Jordan Love. I was listening to ESPN Milwaukee earlier today, and Jason Wilde had said that when he thinks of Jordan Love, he can't help but think about Deshaun Kaiser and how they sort of project in terms of the same statistical performances. He's not sure he feels comfortable with a guy that threw 23 interceptions over a couple seasons in a sort of a limited Division One conference out in the Mountain West. Do you think Green Bay makes the move at 30 to go, hey, Jordan Love is sitting there in our laps. Maybe he's available early round 2. They trade back. Does Aaron Rodgers pull a Brett Favre and say, it's not my job to coach this guy up? What do you do if you're Aaron Rodgers and they draft a quarterback in the first round late again?
I think people have been asking Aaron Rodgers that, and I think his answer has been over the last few weeks is, it's not of concern to him because somebody's not going to come in and be a threat to his job for quite a while, and he feels he's got a lot of years left. So, I don't know if it'll be as bad of a blood as it was with early years with Favre and Rodgers. I'm not sure if I buy into the Deshaun Kaiser comp with those two guys. I think Jordan Love's a much better athlete overall than Kaiser was. I'm not sure. I think that fits very well. Maybe their stats were comparable, and the interception thing is obviously something that people are worried about. But I don't think from a play standpoint, they're both really different kind of quarterbacks. Love's much more athletic. Love's not quite as polished mechanic-wise as Kaiser seemed to be. Kaiser's issues ended up being reading defenses and anticipation and stuff like that, where I think right now Love's are more technical stuff. So that's stuff that's seemingly easier to fix with the technical problems as it is to the issues with mental part of it, trying to understand that and anticipation.
Yeah, that's a great point you make about the preparation part. Kaiser was obviously thrown to the wolves in 16 starts for Cleveland, which potentially one of those all-time bad rosters with one of the worst offensive lines in the modern era. So maybe there's not necessarily a correlation between the two. I think just coming from a smaller school, you're going to get that type of comparison anyway, just given the interception ratio. Meanwhile, while we're having this conversation, the Dallas Cowboys have drafted impact receiver CeeDee Lamb, the burner out of wide receiver out of Oklahoma. You're the Oklahoma Sooner fan on the show, Dave. Talk to us about CeeDee Lamb. Is that a guy that maybe Green Bay could have potentially looked at the 30th position if they wanted to move up? What do you like about him? What's the biggest risk with Lamb in this? And why did he fall to the third wide receiver taken in this draft so far?
I think the biggest reason he fell, obviously, the first guy went off the board in typical Raider fashion, right? Was the fastest receiver in the draft. They take him, they take Ruggs right away. Al Davis is really smiling in his grave and really happy about that they took the fastest receiver available. But you have those two guys. Judy's getting a lot of comps to Julio Jones and Larry Fitzgerald. So if you got a guy who's getting those comps, people really feel strong. He's got all the measurables, runs great routes. It's obvious to see where those were the first couple of guys taken. And Lamb has kind of fallen in being in a guy who probably in any of the drafts in the past 3 years is ideally easily the top guy. Big, strong, explosive. Number wise, as far as combine stuff, just slightly below Ruggs and Judy and that kind of stuff. He sometimes they say he doesn't run as good a routes as Judy, but you're comparing it to those three guys. Or three guys that people expect to come in and be really good right away, with Justin Jefferson right nipping at their butt. So I definitely think he's a guy that the Packers would have loved to take. He's gone now, and it's not something to do about it. But we don't know from behind the scenes if they were talking to Atlanta, if they were talking to Dallas, or if they were talking to Miami about getting up and getting that guy.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris M. Hill writes into the show, and he said, I don't have a person I would like to see us take. How about the best middle linebacker available if they stay put at 30th pick? I love this. I love this comment. I think defense is probably the biggest issue, right? We appreciate the comment, Chris Hill. Thanks for tuning in the broadcast tonight. Uh, Middle linebacker, outside linebacker in a 4-3. Kenneth Murray's the guy we talked about from Oklahoma. The key metric I think in this equation, right, is 285, right? If I had a chalkboard, I'd get up and I'd write that and I'd circle it and I'd highlight it and I would focus on it. We know what that number is, right? That's 285 yards rushing. That's the amount of yards we gave up in a NFC Championship game loss on the road where we could not stop the run. I think a rangy, big, sideline to sideline, aggressive, violent tackler like Kenneth Murray in this defense, right behind Tyler Lancaster, Dean Lowry, and the other group there on the defensive line could be a difference maker. I think if a guy like Kenneth Murray is playing at the middle spot in our defense, I think Green Bay is realistically playing Kansas City in the Super Bowl. What's your take on linebacker and staying at 130?
Yeah, I think both right now, the top two guys on the board have true inside linebackers. Isaiah Simmons gone, but he's really that knife guy, that hybrid guy. Murray's still there, sideline to sideline guy, super freak athlete, and Patrick Queen from LSU is still there. So the top two true inside linebackers are still there. I would say most likely one of those two guys will probably fall to 30 and be available to grab. So maybe the Packers sitting tight saying, hey, we want to pick a linebacker. And right now, until one of those guys is gone, we're going to wait and see what happens. So we would like to see the Packers maybe trade up into this, 13, 14, 15 to grab one of those wide receivers, especially when they started falling. But linebackers definitely a position of need. We talked yesterday about it. What they asked their inside linebacker to do in their defense is be a really athletic guy, be sideline to sideline, and they let Blake Martinez go because he just didn't fit that mold. Not because he was a bad player, but he didn't fit the mold of what they're asking him to do. He's going to go to the New York Giants and do something a little bit different and be more of that thumper type inside linebacker where they're looking for a little bit of a better athlete there. And both those Murray and Patrick Queen are those guys that could fill that role.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take a minute and step away from the current NFL draft. Let's take a look at the last 5 Green Bay Packer draft picks that we have seen in the first round in the last 5 seasons. Maybe let's talk through here the last year's pick, Rashawn Gary. We have Darnell Savage, both of those high-end first rounders from last season. We have Jair Alexander, Kenny Clark, and then the outlier in this equation, Demarius Randall, who was infamously traded for Deshaun Kaiser to Cleveland, kind of to finish out his tenure. If you're going to rebuild a roster and you have one of these 5 players, which you could include Randall in that because he was drafted by the Packers, who are you building around?
I think there's probably two guys that you could really consider. I mean, Randall is what he is. He was kind of a questionable pick at the point when they took him. Didn't know who he was. He wasn't really on radars for first rounders, and you're kind of going, what's up with this guy? But I think if you look at where they've come now, Kenny Clark is one of the best nose guards in the NFL. He's a guy you can build a defense around. He's going to get a huge contract here sometime, probably before the season starts. If the Packers are smart, they'll be able to finagle that salary cap and get them all locked up. So if you're looking at those guys, Jair Alexander has the opportunity to be that shutdown corner. Had a pretty good first 2 years. Savage had a nice rookie year. Still has to progress to get to the level where the Packers want him to be. But Kenny Clark at this point, after 3 years in the league, is one of the best, graded out week in and week out as one of the best interior defensive linemen in the NFL.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's go ahead and take Kenny Clark out of this equation. We kind of know what he is. He's a potential All-Pro. He's going to anchor that defensive line for at least another 4 to 5, maybe 6 seasons. I would say for the long term. What is the biggest issue with a guy like Rashawn Gary? I know he only played 25% of the snaps last year in terms of snap share in that defense, and also given the fact that he's competing, for potential opportunities against Preston and Za'Darius Smith, both of those edge guys in the scheme. Where do you see him fitting in, given that we lost Kyler Fackrell, given that there's going to be a little bit of turnover again that front seven? What do you think he's going to look to do here as we open up 2020?
Yeah, I think that was one last year where a lot of Packer fans were shaking their head. They'd already made the big free agent signing, spent a lot of money to get the two Smiths in. And then the Packers last year were expecting, hey, a wide receiver at 12. And there was some guys who ended up having really good years. Hollywood Brown, A.J. Brown were both available when they picked Gary. And both those guys had really good rookie years. And then some of the guys that went, later in the first round, early second round were obviously available too at that time. So if you look at the numbers and if you follow metrics and you go that route, Gary had a pretty good rookie year. If you just factored how many sacks you had, you'd say, he was terrible. He was a bust. But from a pressure percentage point, based on the amount of snaps he played, he actually had a high level of pressures based on those snaps. The problem was he didn't get a lot of snaps because both the Smiths played really, really well. They played at a really high level. They're both really good football players. So what Gary's going to do this year is what I think what Mike Pettin showed last year is what he's trying to do is have a bunch of interchangeable pieces, right? So I think that's what made Gary so appealing to them. Obviously, eye-opening combine numbers, right? Super freak athlete. Like Rashawn Gary is crazy athletic for the guy his size, but he also played, three technique. He played defensive end with his hand down, and now he's able to show that he could play stand-up, edge with the Packers, which gives him the versatility of playing him at that edge spot, but also playing him inside of his hand down a little bit here or there and giving him that package where they have 4 or 5 guys. We talked about, Zach Bond being a possibility at 30. I saw a couple of mocks today that came out with Zach Bond also, going to the Packers. So, just kind of collecting guys that can do a lot of different things, and Gary fits that mold really well.
Yeah, I would agree. I think for Mike Pettin and in that defensive front, Gary is a nice rotational piece that could potentially be a pretty effective player in the rotation. I don't think I'd want him to be my only guy on one of those edges, at this early stage. I think he has a lot to prove in that sense. But then again, we won't really know the potential until we see how they line them up and sort of the snap share percentages in that defense. So definitely some fantastic perspective, Dave, as usual. Meanwhile, over in the real world in the NFL draft now, we have the last couple of picks. Austin Jackson, the big mountainous offensive tackle from USC, just was picked up by the Miami Dolphins. So Miami, not surprisingly, going quarterback and also getting a bookend tackle to protect their fairly fragile rookie, right, Tua Tagovailoa. What do we know about Jackson in the sort of the second tier group of this offensive line group as we get closer to Green Bay's pick at 130?
Yeah, I think he's a guy that's kind of risen late. He wasn't in that first go around of first round picks early on in the draft process. Was coming out as a junior, wasn't somebody that people even thought was going to come out right away. But he's a big mountain of a man. I've seen a lot of comps to Tyron Smith from Dallas, who's another guy who got picked in the first round. And really like, who's this guy? I never even heard of him. But big guy, super long, good vertical, good 40 time, broad jump. All the athletic measurables from the tackle were there. They weren't like eye opening like Becton ones or Wirfs were, where he's running like 4.7 40s and things like that. But a guy that has proven to be able to do what he needs to do. I wouldn't be surprised to see USC or I see Miami put them on the right side right away, and they got their bookends and they got their quarterback, and Miami's got a ton of picks. They're going to restock really good. That's one of the teams that's probably on people's radars for worst to first kind of scenario based on what they'll be able to do in this draft and what they did at the end of the season. But Austin Jackson's a good point of a coaching staff and a scouting team that puts in way more time than all of us, than all the fans, than all the draft buffs out there. And they found a guy that fits their system and they like a lot.
Yeah, I think obviously the philosophy in Miami is to sort of change the culture, if you will. I think we could both agree, from our perspectives, that the quickest way to get a win and compete and be competitive in the NFL, especially in a division like the AFC East, you got Buffalo, which is up and coming. The Jets have some, dominant players. Obviously, Brady left the Patriots, but you want somebody who's going to protect their franchise investment at that fifth pick with Tagovailoa. And the easiest way to do that, the best way, we would argue, right? Build either side of the line, offensive and defensive line. So that's a great opportunity there. Austin Jackson being picked up by the Miami Dolphins. And that means the Las Vegas Raiders are going to be on the pick clock here, picking 19th. That's one of the last picks that came in, right, for the Khalil Mack trade with the Raiders a couple of seasons ago. So should be interesting to see what the Raiders do with that pick. Green Bay now just 11 slots away, right, from their first pick in this draft. Now is the time, I think, as we get towards 19, 20, 21, I think there's a realistic possibility that maybe Green Bay would be potentially a viable trade partner. What are we looking at here in terms of best available prospects that remain in this class? Let's talk a little bit about the second tier wide receivers, right? Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, CeeDee Lamb, those guys are all been snagged up off the board, which we expected. Talk to me about the next level wide receivers that Green Bay may potentially be interested in if they, in fact, want to get an impact skill position player.
I think the big name who was kind of fringe for the top level that's still out there is Justin Jefferson from LSU. So he's still out there. He's a guy that fits the mold that the Packers are looking for. He's a bigger guy, and he talked a little bit about the Packers liking bigger and longer wide receivers at 6'2", 6'3", and above. He fits that mold big time from that aspect. So he's still there. He's a guy who looks like Oakland just got off the board with a DB. So he's a guy that if the Packers really liked him and he was targeted, maybe they can move up and get him. Maybe he does fall. Again, there's not a lot of teams left here that are looking for wide receiver. Minnesota Vikings, maybe one, maybe New England Patriots. But he's that first guy. Then we fall into that second tier guys. Chenault from Colorado we talked about. He's a guy that we like for being versatile and being able to do a lot of different things. So he's probably still going to be there. Got the smaller guys, Rager from TCU, Hamler from Penn State, that are probably not on the Packers' radar because of their size, but you never know that maybe that's something the Packers think they really need. Maybe they need that slot guy who's got that wiggle, who doesn't fit into the model they have now. They want to get one guy that's not 6'1", 6'2", or above to fit in there. So those are a couple of names I think that are still out there that are high targets for receiver position.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think from a skill position player perspective, obviously you got to find a guy that's going to be a legitimate three down player that can block in their system. It's going to take some of the pressure off of Devontae Adams in some of those schemes. Dan Hovestall, who is following the show tonight, says that Miami's motto, since we're talking a little bit about the Dolphins, changing the culture every year since Marino. Ouch. Wow. Not sure if you're a Miami Dolphins fan, Dan, but we appreciate the feedback. Yeah, again, consistently, right? If you're picking in the top third of this draft, usually you're not competitive in the playoffs. Miami has done a pretty good job of trying to stockpile as much draft capital as they can, which I think is one of the things, as Packer fans, right, Dave, we are consistently picking in the middle and later stages of the first round, which is a little bit of a reflection of that organizational and the trend. What do you do if you're a team like Green Bay and you are at a place where you only need one or two pieces? Are you willing to pay a bunch of ammunition and move up to get a player? I know we're already towards pick 20. The Jaguars are on the pick on the clock at the moment. What do you do? Do you stay at 30? Realistically, is that an investment you want to make? What are you going to do if you're the general manager in this position now with just 10 slots to go before you pick?
At this point, I think if I'm the Packers general manager and I say I really like Justin Jefferson, I really like Chenault out of Colorado. I really like Kenneth Murray and Patrick Queen out of Oklahoma and LSU at linebacker. And the chances of all four of those guys getting picked in the next 9 picks are pretty slim. So I'm sitting here thinking, I like my chances. I don't want to have to use any of that draft capital. I'm going to get one of those four guys. The thing about the NFL draft is the first round is the sexiest round, right? It's all the big names, the guys that were awesome in college. But if you go look at the Packers offense, just look at the Packers offense. Take Aaron Rodgers out of it. You could argue that he should have been the first pick and he fell, right? But look at the best guys in that Packers offense after that. Devontae Adams, second round pick. David Bakhtiari, fourth round pick. Aaron Jones, low round pick. So all these guys were not first round draft picks. We talked yesterday about the fact that all the great Packers wideouts since they got back to the Super Bowl '96 have all been second and beyond. None of them have been first round guys. So it's exciting. It makes for good TV. It good pump up because all these guys that are getting picked in that first round are guys that people are used to. They saw. But some of these guys that are going to get drafted tomorrow and Saturday are going to be the guys that end up being all pro and Pro Bowl guys for NFL teams going forward. So as much as important the first round is and as exciting the first round is, the rest of the draft is actually really the most important part of the draft for most teams and in most of their eyes. So that capital, people are like, oh, I'm going to just trade my fourth round pick and my third round pick to go up and get CD Lamb. Not all the GMs think that way because they value those picks much greater than the average fan does.
Yeah, agreed. I think the big thing is, Green Bay has 10 selections. Tonight is sort of the sexy, flashy, moment where you can go, hey, there's a virtual stage for a lot of these prospects, but the impact players and I think the difference makers that affect the roster at the back end uh, is going to be done on day 2 and day 3. Tomorrow night and then Saturday during the afternoon. Ted Thompson, former Packers general manager, had said consistently the way you're drafting, if you're drafting at the back half of the first round, which they consistently did during his tenure, when they won a Super Bowl, they drafted at 29 to 32, 5 out of 6 seasons. You're looking to fill spots in that last 10 players on your roster, right? Looking to backfill sort of the back end of your roster and sort of tweak the roster there. And there's definitely some gaps, I would say, in that a different position groups, mainly linebacker. I know we talked about yesterday, offensive line, wide receiver has been a big one. Cornerback and safety, they have some pieces, but could potentially see another guy drafted there. How many wide receivers do you think Green Bay is going to take in this draft, Dave?
I think definitely probably they're going to take at least one, maybe two. I think it kind of depends where they feel at tight end, right? So if they feel they need to draft a tight end, maybe it's just one or two. If they feel like they're good at tight end for another year, maybe they go and get 2 or 3. I think it's a higher probability of them taking 1 or 2 and then going out and get priority free agents with get a couple more guys into camp. They did sign Funchess, so I think that changes the dynamic. If they had signed him, they definitely would have probably gone for 2 guys for sure, I think. But with 10 draft picks and them having a need there, I do expect them to take somebody in the first 3 rounds. Might not necessarily be here tonight in the first round, but I think they've probably done their due diligence and they got some guys they feel pretty good about in that second and third round range. And we'll see a pull a trigger on one of those guys if they don't take them tonight.
Yeah, I agree. I think the more opportunities you get, Green Bay has that pick there, pick 30 in the second round. Um, if they take a wide receiver here at 30, or they move up to 25 to take a guy like Justin Jefferson from LSU, how do you feel about the offensive line group going into the season and beyond 2020? Let's talk about not just tonight. Let's talk about how they project after 2020 in terms of the talent that's going to be available on the books.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing that a lot of Packers fans maybe don't look into or don't dive into, right? If you look at just 2020, they're going to have a solid offensive line again. They got Bakhtiari, Jenkins, Lindsley going to be good players. Billy Turner and Lane Taylor still there at guard, and then they signed Ricky Wagner, and he's a solid right tackle to take over for Balaga. So solid core guys there. That's 6 guys that are going to be there. If somebody gets banged up and do a good job. But the question goes after that is 2021. You got Bakhtiari, who's going to be a free agent. You have Lindsley, who's going to be a free agent. And they have 5 guys under contract. And Bakhtiari is going to get a contract, right? There's no question about that. He's going to get his last probably big money contract. The Packers are going to give it to him. And then that leaves maybe somebody like Lindsley looking the way out. Maybe they can't afford to keep him and Bakhtiari and Aaron Jones and re-sign Devontae Adams. And Rodgers' number is getting bigger as his contract progresses, right? So the Packers are definitely probably, I think, taking at least 2 offensive linemen out of these 10 picks. because that's a position they're gonna need going forward. Now, two guys that they've been linked to are still available right now. So we're sitting here talking about wide receiver and linebacker, but there's a good chance that the Packers are sitting here going, hey, Josh Jones and Ezra Cleveland are both their offensive tackle. Ruiz, the center from Michigan, who can also play guard. All three of those guys are there. Maybe they're sitting there going, those are the three guys we wanted at 30. Why should we trade? Because not a single one of them has been picked. So I think there's still that probability too. Again, it's not the sexiest pick, not necessarily needed for a Super Bowl caliber team next year, but
Right.
the draft is not just to get them over the hump this year. So make sure that they consistently have been picking late in the draft for the last 15, 20 years because they have consistently made good decisions throughout to keep them in positions where they're going deep into the playoffs. So this might be one of those things where they grab one of these guys and it sets them up, helps them out next year, but sets them up on the offensive line for 4 or 5 years to come.
Yeah, you do want to take that sort of long view look into it when you're looking, especially with the offensive line. Stephen Grossuch writes into the show tonight. Really says something about the Packers consistently picking later in the draft. Obviously they have that philosophy, right, Dave? We talked about this often, draft and develop. So it's definitely been a little bit of a departure from that over the last couple of seasons with Brian Gutekunst, general manager, and his tendency to land players in free agency. We didn't see quite the same approach, obviously, from a fiscal perspective this season because of the investments they made, in both of the Smith brothers and Billy Turner last year on the offensive line. That being said, what is your perspective on the contract status of a guy like Aaron Jones? He's entering the final year of his rookie contract. Green Bay coming up the 30th pick here, potentially. Jonathan Taylor is probably one of the best available players for a number of different teams. He's still available. What is the possibility of a guy like Jonathan Taylor who plays running back, premium position? He's going to come cheaper. He's going to come with a little bit less wear and tear. Definitely very durable at Wisconsin in that sense. Would they consider maybe drafting a local product like him and letting Aaron Jones walk and or trade him after the year? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely think that's something that the Packers are probably considering with both Jones and Jamal Williams contracts up after this year. They're both going to want to go somewhere where they can have a chance to start and play, and they both have earned that. They've been really good players for the Packers. So they're not going to keep them both. That's without a doubt. They're not unless something weird happens with an injury with one of them. They're not keeping both guys. With the way that running backs have been going back in the NFL, they're the Gurleys and the Freemans and some of these guys that the contracts aren't living up to what they sign. I think you're gonna see teams again start questioning whether they want to give guys big contracts. Aaron Jones deserves one. He's going to want one, and it's a matter of where the Packers are thinking, hey, maybe it's time to draft a guy. Right now, all the three top running backs on most people's boards, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, are all out there. They're high probability they're all going to be there at 30. You don't see a lot of teams here with running back needs picking between now and then.
Right.
So this might be a choice for them to do, is have one of those three guys. So the Packers, again, like with not having any huge needs, I think linebacker is probably their biggest need, but not having any giant needs like some of these other teams that pick higher. Some of these teams, like Tampa Bay trading up because they need an offensive tackle. Like they just signed Brady, and he's going to get killed with the guys they got there now, right? The Packers don't have a huge need, so they can sit there and go, what, some semblance of best player available, but what guy might make the biggest impact? Or they go with, looking forward, looking ahead, and that's where you go O-line or running back, and you're like, Aaron Jones is great. He has been banged up every year since he's been in the league. Maybe Jonathan Taylor fits in, or maybe Dobbins, or maybe they tick off all the Badger fans. They take DeAndre Swift out of Georgia. They think he fits their model better.
Right, DeAndre Swift. That's kind of the unknown, and unfortunately for him, I think in a lot of other years, he would probably be considered one of the top prospects, if not the top prospect, just given his level of competition, his production. Obviously, Jonathan Taylor, we know him locally, coming from the great home state here in Wisconsin. He churned out, 6,000 plus yards. He logged almost 1,000 carries, not as involved in the passing game, so you're really not too concerned about that. He is obviously very durable, but what would the big knock be at a guy like Jonathan Taylor in this offense? For me, I think the big risk is around ball control, ball security. He had 18 fumbles, he lost 14 over the course of his 3 seasons in Madison. What's the biggest risk besides ball security you see with a guy like Jonathan Taylor?
I think the stuff that's been going around on him, ball security and the amount of carries he has is something that people are worried about, right? The other knock that I don't know if I necessarily agree with it, right? So sometimes Badger backs get knocked because their offensive line is really good. And people are questioning whether Jonathan Taylor is a product of a really good offensive line. There's been some Badger backs that have been really successful in the NFL. Melvin Gordon's still out there doing, and there's some other guys that have struggled a little bit. Going all the way back to Brent Moss, coming out, and some of these guys, and even Ron Dane struggled a little bit in the NFL. He had a good career, but nothing like his college career, right? So people still, I think, attribute some of that to being a product of always having a really good offensive line. And Jonathan Taylor's a home run hitter if the hole's there, but in the NFL, that hole goes, in college, even in the Big Ten, it's even that much bigger in that level. When you get to the NFL, those holes are, inches wide. You got to be able to see those and hit those. And it's really more important to be able to have that vision. And they're not, people are unsure whether Jonathan Taylor is a product of that offensive line creating those holes, or if he's able to do some of that himself.
Yeah, great perspective on the local product, Jonathan Taylor. He still is available on the board, among the best available. We remains to be seen whether or not Green Bay has any interest or if they're going to pull the trigger there. Meanwhile, during our conversation, the Jacksonville Jaguars, with their second pick of the first round, pick up Kay Chason, the big stud defensive end from LSU. Let's switch the conversation here from the offensive side to the defensive line, the front seven. Who do we think in terms of defensive front seven guys picking there at the 30th round, back half of first round one? Would you be interested in if you're building a roster with some young, rookie talent?
I think there's two guys that the Packers have been linked to in various different people's writings, and more at a D tackle level. I don't see the Packers looking at a defensive end. They run the 3-4, so they're not looking for that true defensive end. Some of the guys like Espinoza out of Iowa, they're still there. The guy at Penn State, those guys are probably not going to fit the mold of what the Packers are looking for. But there are guys who are out there. Two names that have been linked to the Packers is Ross Blaylock out of TCU, a big guy. He's more of an explosive guy, maybe similar to Kenny Clark, not as much of a run stuffer. But from run stuffing perspective, Jordan Elliott out of Missouri, those are two defensive tackle type bodies, interior line bodies that maybe the Packers think, maybe we're all thinking inside linebacker helps solve that run defense problem. We don't know if the Packers are sitting there going, hey, maybe it's just a matter of getting another interior lineman to play next to Kenny Clark, and maybe Lancaster and Dean Lowry aren't doing the job that they need to do, and that's the way they want to go. So I have seen a couple people linking Blaylock or Elliott to the Packers, even with this first round pick. Both those guys obviously still there.
Yeah, and meanwhile, let's shift back to the offensive side. The pick is in for the Philadelphia Eagles, who, as we all know, were pretty thin, paper thin, some would say, beyond Alshon Jeffrey and Nelson Aguilar. And they pick up the big wide receiver, shifty wide receiver who dominated at Texas Christian, Jalen Reagor. We talked about him on our pre-draft show. What do we know about this second tier group of wide receivers? Kind of surprising that Justin Jefferson is still on the board at 22, within target and within range now, I think, with Green Bay if they really want to make a splash play.
Yeah, I think looking at what the Eagles like and what they're looking for, they really were looking for that slot guy, that Edelman type, the wiggle guy, and Rager fits that really, really well. Like he's a return guy. He plays a slot. He'll take reverses. He'll take jet sweeps. He'll work those zones in the middle. I think that's what we're looking for. They still have Alshon Jeffrey on the outside. Justin Jefferson's a very similar player to Alshon Jeffrey. So he wasn't a guy that was linked that much to Philadelphia Eagles. But obviously they have a drastic need for a wide receiver, and they made a play for a guy that we really like, but we also didn't think that they fit into what the Packers have typically been looking for here in the last couple of years under the new regime.
Yeah, do you think, obviously we know the history with Green Bay and picking wide receivers in the first round, since I was a kid growing up watching the teams in 96, 97, 98 compete for world titles, they've drafted one guy in the first round. We talked about that, right? That was Javon Walker back in 2003. The likelihood of Green Bay taking a player not on the wideout side of the ball, how do you feel about them going maybe something totally obscure? What do we think about tight end? What do we think about Cole Kmet, maybe out of Notre Dame? Or do they like Jace Sternberger there coming into his second year?
I definitely think they like Sternberger. I think that's the biggest reason they gave up Graham is they like what they saw out of Sternberger. Most likely they like what they saw out of him in practice. He was injured, didn't get a ton of time in games at the end of the year, but they were paying Graham a lot of money, and I'm sure they saw what they needed to see out of Sternberger to be there. Good college career, and he's a guy that they drafted pretty high, third-round pick last year. So
Yeah.
I don't think that they go tight end. I think you'll see a lot of ticked off Packer fans if they do go tight end in the first round here. That's one of the spots. I think tight end or quarterback are two spots people are like, no, don't do that. And there's been some teams linking to it. There's some people who think the tight end is the biggest need for the Packers right now. I don't necessarily agree with it. They did put a lot of draft capital in Sternberger, and I think he's a guy that they feel really good about going forward. There's not as big of a tight end as the two guys. Him and I actually like the other tight end out of Notre Dame too, Claymore. They're both seem like they'll be pretty quality players, but I don't necessarily think the Packers go tight end that early. But I do expect them to look at tight end in one of those later rounds, maybe one of those comp picks they got coming there in the fifth round.
Yeah, they do have the extra two picks in the fifth round, compensatory picks that came over from last year. Sternberger, if we all remember, was a third round, so a day two pick a year ago. And I definitely think if they look into a Cole Kmet, might be to the ire of Robert Tanyan, who has yet to see a little bit of an impactful role. He's a guy that's potentially maybe on the fence in terms of his roster availability. Mercedes Lewis obviously re-signed to that 1 year deal. He's more of an inline blocker. He's not going to stretch the field in that 21 personnel with two tight ends. So he's typically going to stay there at the line of scrimmage. I think you got to keep a guy like Mercedes Lewis around, though, if anything else, to mentor a player like Sternberger, just given the success that he's had. So great commentary around the tight end position. You are watching Double Coverage Radio's presentation of the 2020 NFL Draft and all Green Bay Packers coverage. Right now, the Minnesota Vikings, our rival in the NFC North, are on the clock in a pick they got in the Stephon Diggs trade, number 22. What are we hoping to not see from Minnesota? Obviously, they're not going to be picking defensive line or offensive line. They've filled those particular position groups the last couple of years. Do they have the potential to draft another wide receiver, or maybe a younger, cheaper guy to pair with Adam Thielen?
Yeah, I think with Minnesota sitting here at 22 and then again at 25, I think they're looking at wide receiver. I think they're looking at corner. Right, they had some major issues in the defensive backfield, corner safety, something along those lines. So I think that the high probability of them. Justin Jefferson's still out there. Another guy who was kind of that first tier, T. Higgins, is still out there. And then there's some of that second tier guys with Chanel, Denzel Mims, who's linked to the Packers. So there's some really quality receivers still out there. And then when you're looking at corner, there's some really good cornerbacks. So something that'd be ironic. Trayvon Diggs is still out there, so that's that'd be nice if they picked him up. That'd be a little bit ironic. I don't know if they'll go with that. McKinney's still out there, the safety hybrid kind of maybe slot corner guy out of Alabama. So I think Minnesota's probably looking at those two positions greatly: wide receiver and defensive back, most likely cornerback.
What do we, since we're talking a little bit about Minnesota, which we try not to do unless it's absolutely necessary on our programming, what do we know about Antoine Winfield Jr.? He's a prototypical sort of hybrid safety corner, played his college football at the University of Minnesota. Is he a guy that potentially Green Bay might have some interest in, maybe in the middle part of the draft, somewhere between round 3 and 5? I know they have obviously Adrian Amos and Darnell Savage. Raven Green was hurt last year. He could play a little bit of that hybrid linebacker in the box safety type role. Antoine Winfield Jr., we know the pedigree is there. His dad played a number of years in the NFL. Is he a guy that potentially could be on the radar for the Packers personnel office?
Yeah, I definitely think he's on the radar, but I do think he's a guy that's been shooting off people's draft boards after combine and after his interview segments, stuff like that. Where I think he's pretty much the consensus number two safety right now behind Xavier McKinney. So, if the Packers like him, I think he's a guy that might be one of those surprise picks at 30, where they fell in love with a guy who can come in, be a slot corner guy. Kevin King contract's almost up. They don't have a major need for corner, but they haven't re-signed Tremont Williams, and they even made it known that they're not going to make that decision until after the draft, which tells you they have some guys they're trying to get in the draft. And if they draft them, then Tremont Williams might be sent on his way and maybe retirement in his future. So I think Antoine Winfield Jr. is a guy who's his dad played for a long time, really good in the NFL, and he proved in college at Minnesota that he's a really high quality, good player and somebody that is that versatile guy that can play in the outside, can play the slot. And still can play some, deep center field safety as well. So he's that kind of guy that teams are looking for right now. Do some hybrid, different stuff.
Yeah, he definitely reminds me a little bit about the similarity to Darnell Savage a year ago, a guy not a lot of people are familiar with outside the Midwest. Obviously, had some big games for Minnesota. The Badgers played the Gophers for Paul Bunyan's Axe, and he showed up and played well in that game. A game the Wisconsin Badgers won. Uh, on the defensive side of the ball, let's continue to talk a little bit about the secondary. How do we feel about Tremont Williams? Obviously, he is He's been a role player the last couple of seasons. Do we think that realistically he's going to be back wearing green and gold next year? And if so, what do we do at the cornerback position outside of Kevin King and Jair Alexander?
Yeah, I think the Packers, like I said, I think they feel like they can get him. I don't think Tremont Williams is going to go anywhere else, right? I think he's either going to come back to the Packers and finish his career with one more hurrah, or he's probably going to retire. I think it's going to lot's going to depend on where they go in the first 4 rounds of the draft. If they pick somebody here at corner, maybe they fell in love with the Winfield, or they fell in love with somebody out there, Jeremy Chin, who can do some of those different things, and they find a guy they like, then maybe they either offer Tremont a little bit less money and see if he takes it, or they say, hey, it's time to move on, and we don't have a spot for you. So I think where the Packers are at. Tremont showed last year that he's still got some legs in him. He can still play, and I think he's a guy that if he came back could still put in another quality year before you feel like he's a liability out there.
Yeah, I would agree. Let's change gears here a little bit and talk some more about the perimeter on the offense at wide receiver in that second sort of borderline tier two group, highlighted by Justin Jefferson. What's another what's another mediocre name of a guy that maybe isn't going to make the roster at this point in Green Bay moving forward? Who's on the back end of the roster on the current 53 that you're thinking maybe going to be replaced by one of these upper tier elite receivers that could come in this draft class?
I think there's a couple guys that Kumaro has proven that he's always kind of on the fringe, right? He's Aaron Rodgers loves him, so he's there and he's done really good. And he's a great special teams guy, so he's kind of on the fringe, but I think he's probably got his spot solidified as long as he stays healthy going forward. I think the biggest guy, Geronimo Allison didn't come back, right? They let him go. I think St. Brown is a guy who's out there, and I think MVS is a guy that I don't know what it was, but he doesn't seem to be well loved by the new staff, right? I think Mike McCarthy really liked him, thought he could be a game breaker guy, and he's a guy that he had a goofy interview just a couple of days ago saying he's one of the best receivers ever. I wouldn't be surprised if he's one of those surprise cuts, coming out of camp, going, "Whoa, I didn't see that coming," right? Especially if they
One of the
draft.
best receivers ever.
Yeah, he did say that. He said Moss and Fitzgerald, Rice, and me, and you're like, what? Come on, dude. I think if they pick a guy here in the first, second round, he might be one of those surprise guys. It's just like, wow, I didn't see that coming, but they have to make room. They're not going to probably cut Funchess. You're obviously not going to cut Devontae Adams, and Lazard made some plays and came on at the end of last year, so he's a guy that they're probably looking for bigger things this year.
Yeah, I would agree. And hey, while we were having this conversation about wide receivers, the irony from the Twin Cities, what do we know? The fans watching here the show tonight, double coverage radio, disappointed to say LSU wide receiver Justin Jefferson was picked up by the Minnesota Vikings. So very clearly, their sort of secondary plan to compensate for the loss of Stephon Diggs, it factors in with Justin Jefferson. Great receiver, put up some incredibly good numbers for the Tigers against great competition. I want to say he had over 100 catches last year for the Tigers. What do we know about Denzel Mims as we continue to talk about offense and these impact skill position players that are still on the board?
Yeah, we definitely thought, Minnesota, high probability they're going to go with wide out or corner here with these two picks they have, pretty close to each other. Boom, they shoot out. Just Jefferson was the highest guy on the board right now, so not something that we didn't see coming. But Mims is a guy that's been linked to the Packers a lot. He's a big guy, 6'3", over 200 pounds, so he fits the mold of what they like. Explosive guy, gets downfield. He's not what you would call a burner, right? But he's definitely got the Jets, and he uses his frame really well. So, we talked last year how when the Packers were up at 12, and DK Metcalf was there, and he had all that draft hype and with his shirt off and stuff, and people were upset they didn't take him because he ended up having a really good rookie year, right? So
Right.
there's somebody in this draft who really compares to the same kind of player, really can push vertically, maybe not the greatest route runner underneath yet, but has all the ability to get there. I think Mims is the guy that mostly closely is to that. And then it's somebody who comes in, works with the Packers staff, but being able to work side by side with Devontae Adams, who's one of the best route runners in the NFL, I think they'll be able to learn a thing or two and catch a thing or two out of there, so they can, maybe Mims can come in, work with that group, work with the Packers staff, and get better at that point. And then he might be a steal at 30.
Yeah, we might be talking steal. I think realistically too. You mentioned DK Metcalf, and aside from the memories that were burned into all of our eyes, Pete Carroll taking his shirt off in the draft room last year. DK Metcalf, he's a guy. Realistically, every single team passed on the guy numerous times. Do you think he would have been a borderline first, second round pick had they known what they were getting?
Well, I think definitely. Again, there's all this time now at the draft, and they even pushed it a little bit later here the last couple of years, and people have a time to pick apart all kinds of different stuff. So, with Metcalf, it was all he can do is run deep, and he's not going to be able to run by these guys in the NFL. And he proved that he caught on fast. He's able to run the NFL routes. He's able to hit multiple routes on an NFL route tree, and he proved the people wrong because he also was able to run past NFL DBs, and he had a
Right.
really good rookie year. So people will go back and look and like, man, what if he looked like in the Packers, uniform and playing across from Devontae Adams and having Aaron Rodgers throw him the ball. Not that Russell Wilson is any slouch either, right? So he ended up in a good situation, but I think that's part of it too, right? Is you got to look at Justin Jefferson. Kirk Cousins is a good quarterback. Is he the right guy to throw Justin Jefferson? Obviously, Stephon Diggs was not a big fan of Kirk Cousins, for various reasons, and maybe that's not the greatest scenario for somebody like Justin Jefferson. So, at a wide receiver, it's really part of it is who's throwing you the ball, right? That's one of the positions where you don't just get handed the ball very often, right? Somebody's got to get it to you, and so for them, they're tied to who's throwing the ball, who's protecting the guy that's throwing the ball. Where at quarterback and running back, those are two positions where you're going to get the ball, and be able to do something out of nothing at various times.
Yeah, absolutely. We just posed the question to the audience tonight. What's your favorite Packer draft pick of all time? And let us know. And we've got a comment from Tom Bertrand, a longtime teacher in the Elkhorn Area School District. Tom, thanks for coming on the broadcast and tuning into Double Coverage Radio's coverage of the 2020 NFL Draft. All Green Bay Packers all the time. He says, my favorite Green Bay draft pick was Tony Mandarich. Just kidding. Yeah, funny jokes here on the show with the first round pick coming up on the clock for Green Bay. Seriously, one of my favorites was Jordy Nelson back in 2008. I think we could all agree Jordy Nelson was one of those guys when he was drafted that I felt just reading, into his bio and seeing the potential, super excited. Seemed like a real down to earth guy. Played his football at Kansas State. He grew up on a farm like a lot of us did here in Wisconsin. He sort of fit the bill, right? Of I'm a Wisconsin guy, but I'm not from Wisconsin. What do we think are sort of the ramifications? We'll stay on that Jordy Nelson train here. Would we have done things a little bit differently if we would have known the depth wasn't going to be as up to the task the last couple seasons? Do you think they would have maybe kept Jordy Nelson, maybe kept Randall Cobb? I know this is kind of a stagnant conversation, but I think it's relevant given that Green Bay has had some issues at wide receiver.
Yeah, I definitely think that they put a lot of stock into some of the guys they drafted. They did draft some guys relatively high, MVS and St. Brown, and they brought some, had some other guys in there. So I'm not necessarily think they would have paid Cobb what they paid him, but you never know if they would have kept Jordy, right? Randall Cobb went out and got a decent contract, and he's even signed a bigger contract with Houston now. So, in hindsight, yeah, I think that's something that they might have reconsidered based on how the guys panned out. But at the time, the younger guy, the cheaper guy, you're trying to manage salary caps and stuff. You have a couple guys that you think could play close to the level of a declining guy. Cobb may have proved that he's not yet declining. Jordy was definitely on a decline after a fantastic career, right? So, definitely something that they probably would like to reconsider. But past is the past, and they're stuck with what they got now. They got to either get those guys to improve and play a little bit better with the new system, or they got to go out and get somebody new.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's kind of a toss up, right? Just in terms of the long term impact. I think both of those guys have probably gone through the motions long enough that we thought maybe we do something differently at receiver, which is why we're in the spot we're in now. And again, a little bit of disappointing news. Oklahoma linebacker Kenneth Murray just picked up by none other than the New England Patriots, and Bill Belichick just staying put at 24, doesn't have a solidified quarterback situation. A lot of guys, experts around the league, et cetera, felt like maybe New England would pull the trigger on a quarterback. Jordan Love is still available, out on the landscape in terms of best players available right here at the back end of first round. Kenneth Murray, take him off the potential list here to become a Green Bay Packer. What do we like about Kenneth Murray and maybe the linebacking crew? I know we talked about Patrick Queen. Is there anybody else realistically that Green Bay would pull the trigger on at this latest stage in the first round in terms of being a pure impact linebacker? And what do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think with Murray there, it looks like the Chargers actually traded to the Patriots, so Bill Belichick going to his back to his grab as many picks as he possibly can model. But I definitely think that Murray coming off the board is something that I think the Packers had him on their board and they were interested in him. But Patrick Queen's still out there, and they're both really comparable players. So I think you got those two guys being there. We're looking at, one, two, three, four, quite a few picks yet until the Packers are up. So now they have to make a choice. Is it worth trading up a couple spots and trying to swap out with Miami, who's on to their third first round pick, right? And swap back with them if they really think they need a linebacker. But again, there's still quite a few wideouts out there. Mims is still out there. And there's guys that they like. And then if they want to go offensive tackle, there's still two offensive tackles and the center that have been linked to the Packers. So there's still quite a few guys left who are in that kind of range of what they're looking for. So I don't think they're going to be trading up, and I still think trading back, as bad as Packer fans want to stay up and see them pick somebody, I definitely think trading back is still an option with the amount of guys that are available for them.
Yeah, I'm definitely starting to lean in that direction, right? One way or the other. I'm leaning slightly here towards Green Bay maybe moving off into the second round of the draft. I think just from a value perspective, it might make sense to do that. If they don't trade back, though, how realistic is it starting to look that potentially they're going to stay there and shore up the offensive line and sort of the anchors in front of Aaron Rodgers?
I'm thinking more and more of the way the draft's playing out right now, unless they are falling in love with Chenault or Denzel Mims as a wide receiver. I'm looking more and more with Cleveland, Ezra Cleveland still out there, Josh Jones still out there, and Ruiz out of Michigan. That's three really quality offensive linemen. Cleveland and Ruiz are kind of seen as plug and play guys right away. Ruiz can come in and play guard, and maybe Lindsley doesn't come back and he shifts to center. Cleveland can come in and compete to be the right tackle. Josh Jones comes in, and who knows? He's a guy who comps to a left tackle. Maybe he has a really good rookie year, and it's unfeasible to think about. But maybe David Bakhtiari is the odd man out, and they re-sign Lindsley, and they draft Josh Jones. So there's all these different scenarios. But I think those three guys, again, it's not the sexiest pick, but games are won and lost on the offensive line. And if we can't, as Rodgers gets older, he's obviously less mobile. He's not being able to do some of the stuff he's been able to do. So protecting him is even more important as he ages here the next couple of years.
Yeah, yeah. Rodgers is getting what do we like to say? He's on the back nine of his professional career, to use a golf analogy. Offensive line, I wouldn't hate Brian Gutekunst if they went that direction. As you said, it's not the flashy, sexier pick. I think people want to see an impact player. I personally don't feel that Laviska Shenault is going to be the answer at 30. I think just given his injury concerns, I think you could wait and potentially get him at some point in the second round. He might even still be there at pick 60, just given that T. Higgins is still available and obviously Denzel Mims. Denzel Mims is probably going to be my pick. If you're making the pick now and you're saying Green Bay is going to stay, Dave, who's the guy for you? For me, it's Denzel Mims, wide receiver, Baylor.
I'm really thinking offensive tackle. So I think if it plays out now, the way it's going now, I think it's probably Ezra Cleveland out of Boise State is the guy that they pick if the cards fall now. Again, I don't think it's the sexiest pick, but I think the way the things have fallen and the fact that they haven't drafted a first round wideout in quite a long time as far as their successful career of wideouts, I really think offensive tackle is the place they're going to go.
Yeah, I think that's potentially it's in the cards at this point. Ruiz, the center from Michigan, just got picked by the New Orleans Saints, which is a solid pickup for them. Offensive line, he can play guard. He can also play probably some right tackle at that point. We've seen him dominate games against the Badgers in his time at the Big Ten. What do we know about Ruiz? What do we know about center? Do you think after Corey Linsley, do you think there's a realistic possibility that maybe he kicks out to another position, or do we see him staying in the center of the trench there in the offensive line?
I definitely think he's a center, right? He's probably a guy that if you had to play him at guard in a pinch. So, we talked about Ruiz maybe being a Packers guy. He's a guy they probably would have brought in and played at guard. But Lindsley's proven that he's a center. He's a guy who's athletic enough and long enough to play other positions, but he's a high quality center. He's a plus player at the center position. So I definitely think he's a guy that the Packers would like to try to lock up. Again, he's another guy whose contract's up after this year, and he's a guy they want to lock up, but it all comes back to the dollar amounts and how to maneuver the salary cap and things along those lines. But Lindsley is a big time player, a plus player as a center for the Packers.
Yeah, obviously they're not going to be drafting a true center in this particular place, given the performance of Lindsley. He's a great player. He's sort of the heart and soul of that line, literally and figuratively. And Steven Grossuch, he wants us to know that he is not thrilled with Minnesota having another pick in the first round. Steve, we appreciate the sentiment here on the show. west of the border here in Wisconsin. They've got a couple of picks, right? They landed Justin Jefferson. Some would say that they snagged him from our grasp back at pick 22, and now they grab another guy potentially to help their team. Vikings on the clock again. Boo. I think that's probably that's going to go down as the comment of the night so far tonight. Thanks, Steve. Keep on staying tuned. Green Bay now 5 picks away. Gutekunst has not made a move in the first round. Do you think he's going to trade up at this point? There's probably enough players left on the board at this stage that maybe they don't have to give up any more draft capital to move 3 or 4 spots. What are you going to do if you're the general manager and it's 5 picks away? Is there a guy you really like in this, particular situation where you say we're going to wait, and if we lose him, we can live with that?
I would say that at this point, if they haven't traded up yet, they probably don't either wasn't able to make a deal, or they don't see there's anybody that they absolutely need to go up and get with the risk reward and the value point of it. So with 5 picks away before they have, I definitely there's probably 6 guys on their board that are all relatively close that they'd feel comfortable drafting and not losing some of that capital that they've earned. Having 10 picks in the draft, they obviously did that because they wanted to have more extra picks. As you mentioned, it's kind of a crapshoot. We got, the more guys you get, the better chance of getting somebody to stick as well. A lot of these first round picks, for whatever reason, are not going to pan out, not going to be as successful as they were in college. So, again, we talked about how important that second, third, fourth, fifth round picks can be to teams, and how some of the best players in the NFL were drafted at that level, even some of the best guys in the Packers roster right now.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. Uh, let's talk a little bit about the offensive backfield. I know we talked about the potential of Aaron Jones to maybe explore, restricted free agency. He's coming into the 4th year of his rookie contract, for the Packers. Jamal Williams, is he a guy that you could run the offense through if for some reason Jones were to go down or be traded?
Yeah, I think they're. If you look at, they're both very similar in their running styles, right? Jones maybe a little more fast twitch, has that little more wiggle to get past there, but they're both one cut guys. They both fit in really well with the offense that Coach LaFleur brought with him to install here. So I think they're both. That's why they both had success. Some might say that Williams is a little stronger runner, a little more powerful than Jones, and again, Jones has a little bit more breakaway. So I think they fit well. We talked a little bit yesterday about having that 1-2 combo to help keep guys away from gaining so many carries. So they work really well. But the chances of the Packers being able to keep both those guys after next year are pretty slim. They still have Dexter Williams, who was pretty highly sought, out of Notre Dame last year, and he's a guy that maybe they think can step into the role that one of those 2 guys plays. But again, you're getting down to that, thinking probably not first round, but maybe if one of these running backs keeps falling and somebody like Jonathan Taylor or Dobbins or even Swift is there at 62 or close to 62, it's something they might want to pull the trigger on as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely some realistic potential there for Jamal Williams. You would, comparatively speaking, he's had moments where he's performed. He's had some issues with some health. I know he was missed parts of games last year with some concussion type issues. Not something that I necessarily think is a huge red flag for him in the offense. Um, Go ahead and give us your comments on what you guys think are going to be the Packers' selection here. You were watching Double Coverage Radio's coverage of the 2020 NFL Draft, and the San Francisco 49ers have actually just traded with the Minnesota Vikings. So Minnesota apparently not thrilled with the options on the table there. Interesting scenario. San Francisco looking to make some moves in the NFC. We obviously we faced them in the NFC Championship game, and they have the look of a roster that doesn't have as many holes. Very similar to Green Bay in that sense, with John Lynch over there at the general manager spot. What are you thinking if you're San Francisco right here? Do you think they're going to go for another skill offensive position player? Maybe they go defensive line to fill the spot that they vacated in the trade of DeForest Buckner.
Yeah, they need a wideout too. So I'm a little worried as a Packer fan if you're thinking wideout. They've been linked to a lot of different wideouts. They lost Emmanuel Sanders, and I think they're probably either looking up for either Xavier McKinney. Maybe they really love him, or they're looking to grab a wide receiver moving up to that. And we got to hope that if you're a Packers fan who loves Mims, let's hope it's not Mims and maybe it's Chenault or maybe it's Ayuk out of Arizona State. It's maybe one of those 2 guys.
Yeah, I'm personally near and dear to my heart. Denzel Mims from Baylor, the Baylor Bears. He's the guy that I'm hoping Green Bay picks. My heart says Denzel Mims. My head says Josh Jones from Houston, offensive line. I know we talked about that potential scenario. on our pre-draft show last night, the inaugural show of Double Coverage Radio. I am your host, Travis Pipe, sitting here in the Butler, Wisconsin studios. Dave Mogensen, fellow EAHS alum, sitting to my left. Dave, are you still front row and center outside UW Oshkosh Titan Stadium?
Yeah, I'm pretty close to Titan Stadium here at Oshkosh. So,
Stone's throw from another WEAC Power, UW Oshkosh, where tonight actually we have some breaking news from San Francisco and their virtual headquarters. Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State gets picked up by the Niners, so that probably spells the end for Marquise Goodwin in the back half of that receiver core. What do we know about Brandon Ayuk? Obviously, N'Keal Harry came by way of Arizona State, who is currently on the roster for the New England Patriots. Didn't do much. He was a little bit not your prototypical receiver in terms of his size. Durability was some concern with him going into college. Are there similarities there with Brandon Ayuk in terms of the offense he came with down there with Herm Edwards?
yeah, I think similar player. Murray was deemed a little more explosive guy. So Ayuk fits in well because they have Samuel, right? Debo Samuel, who's their slot guy, who's their wiggle guy, who can dance around a little, work the middle, and Ayuk comes in and fills kind of what Emmanuel Sanders did, or the other character did, and he can work the outside, play the outside receiver, stretch the field a little bit. He's a larger guy, 6 foot, 205, 210 pounds. So he fits kind of the mold of what they're looking to replace in Goodwin and Emmanuel Sanders, and they still have Samuel, who they think really highly of, to work that middle and take some of those jet sweeps and reverses and stuff. Very similar offenses to what the Packers do. That same tree, the Kyle Shanahan tree, that's where LaFleur came from. So similar offenses. The Packers just don't have their Samuel, their slot guy, their guy to do that right now. So that's Ayuk kind of fits the Devontae Adams role. The Packers have that guy already, so he wasn't a guy that I thought the Packers would be looking at too much. But I'm sure some Packer fans kind of liked what they saw with him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're starting to get closer to the end of the first round. The Miami Dolphins, who have seemingly had 19 picks so far in the first round, on the clock with another selection. It'll be interesting to see the Dolphins here. They've shored up their offensive line. They grabbed their franchise quarterback Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama. What do you think you do here if you're Miami? Obviously, trying to compete and rebuild the culture. Green Bay doesn't have the same type of similarities in terms of the organizational position in the conference. If you're Miami, the best available guys are there. Do you go and get another skill position impact player? Are you going to be drafting in the defensive secondary? What do you do if you're head coach Brian Flores down there in South Beach?
I think if I'm Miami, they've been linked to running back a lot. Their leading rusher last year was Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's not crazy to have your quarterback be your leading rusher this day and age in the NFL, but you don't think of Ryan Fitzpatrick as the guy who should be doing it. So I definitely think that this could be the spot where the first running back comes off the board. The other thing is Xavier McKinney out of Alabama, the safety, still sitting there. Alabama's produced some pretty good safeties. Former Packer who's still bouncing around the league, and Clinton Dix, he was an Alabama guy, but Xavier McKinney was a guy who was thought to be possibly top 10, probably top 15, and he's still sitting there at 26. So that might be something where their head coach is a defensive guy, and Brian Flores, and he sees a guy that he can do a lot of things with. Otherwise, they've been linked to running back pretty highly with this third pick very often. Maybe this is where DeAndre Swift goes, or maybe Jonathan Taylor gets pulled off the board, a guy that Miami likes at the running back spot.
Yeah, you would think Miami would almost have to go running back here, given that their leading rusher was Ryan Fitzpatrick, who I think was drafted back in 1988, if I recall. He's been around the NFL for quite some time, so should be interesting to see if the Dolphins snag up Jonathan Taylor, or maybe DeAndre Swift from Georgia could potentially be the guy there. Almost a plug and play 3 down player at running back if you're looking to sort of rebuild that offensive side of the football. You get your franchise quarterback, you get your bookend tackle, you get your impact linebacker, and you get a starting 3 down linebacker, or excuse me, 3 down tailback. Maybe it's J.K. Dobbins. We'll wait to see. The Dolphins are nearing the end of their pick time on the clock, number 26. That means Green Bay staring in the face their selection. Interesting to note here, Seattle, which has traded up in 7 of the last 10 drafts, is about to go on the clock. Green Bay has some history with the Seahawks in terms of trading in the first round. What are your scenarios here involving Seattle potentially maybe swapping places with the Packers here?
Yeah, I don't know if the Packers have a guy they really are in love with that they have to move up a couple spots and again lose some of that capital. Even to move up a spot or two, it's probably going to cost you that 30th pick in addition to something else this year, if not something next year too. Because if teams know that you're moving up, it's because it's a guy you really, really, really want. So, I think Seattle's probably looking at an offensive line help in that spot. There's some really quality guys still left at offensive line. Uh, I think that's a spot that they're looking either that or edge. They haven't re-signed Clowney, so I would think that Seattle's probably thinking that there's a couple of guys that they could need as there as well too from an offensive line or defensive end perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the potential to trade up. I didn't really think Green Bay was going to make a move beyond 4, 5, 6 spots here in the first round. I think it just would have taken way too much capital. So this scenario is kind of playing out the way that I sort of thought it might have with the players that they have available on their board. Again, we've been talking it repetitively like beating a dead horse. Either side of the football, right? Offensive line, potentially impact linebacker, both of those areas of need for Green Bay. Patrick Queen still available currently, the LSU linebacker that's still out there on the board. The big thing, I think, the big question now is viability to potentially trade back. I know we talked about trading up. There's 4 picks left in the round before the Packers are supposed to make their selection. And breaking news: Green Bay has traded with Seattle. They have just swapped positions. Green Bay now taking over the 26th pick. They traded with the Miami Dolphins right as their pick was potentially supposed to be in. So Green Bay will pick up the 26th pick by way of Miami. And this is going to be very interesting to see who was on the board that the Packers felt like maybe they needed. Here's the thing: Miami just drafted Isaiah Simmons from Clemson, and the possibility of them maybe not needing a linebacker. What do you think the equation is there for Green Bay?
Yeah, the more and more you look at who's left in the draft board with Seattle, who needs offensive line help with Tennessee, who needs offensive line help. You really think that it possibly could be one of those offensive tackles. But like you said, there's one really game-breaking linebacker left, and that's Patrick Queen. He's out there. And then if they really like one of the wideouts that's left, I know that the Ravens have been linked to receivers as well. So it's one of those couple guys I think that they're going to come up here for.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting here to see how this goes. Tom Bertrand again. Thanks for the commentary. Thanks for tuning in, Tom, to the show. Packers are up. It's kind of refreshing to see Green Bay move up a few slots here in the first round, picking at number 26, leapfrogging Seattle. It almost makes you wonder. Seattle has needs on the offensive line. Green Bay has needs on the offensive line. Maybe there was some rumblings about a potential player. I know you said potentially offensive line. Maybe they're looking to snipe somebody out from under the Hawks nest in Seattle. Let's recap for anybody that's just tuned in to the show tonight. If you're watching Double Coverage Radio here on Facebook with myself, Travis Pipes, show host, and my co-host Dave Mogensen, give me 2 top tackles that are still available that could be very plug and play for the Packers on the end of the line.
I think the two big names left for offensive tackle, Josh Jones out of Houston and Ezra Cleveland out of Boise State, are both guys that have been linked. Most people assume that Josh Jones would be gone by now, and they've been linking Cleveland to the Packers because he's been more probable guy. But guess what? The Packers pick is just in. We talked about this yesterday. Jordan Love going to the Packers.
Wow. The Packers have drafted Jordan Love of the Utah State collegiate ranks. That has got to be a shocker for, I would say, all of Green and Gold Nation. Wow, there's a lot to talk about with this pick. We talked about Jordan Love on the pre-draft show last night. We talked about the viability of him coming in and being able to sit behind, a surefire Hall of Famer like Aaron Rodgers. Everybody knows Rodgers has said he wants to play into his 40s. What's the reality now with Jordan Love being drafted right around the same slot that he was back in '05 to sit for a couple years? Aaron Rodgers' contract, the massive mega extension he signed, is up. Could we potentially see the end on the horizon for the Hall of Fame quarterback from Cal Berkeley?
I mean, I definitely think you have to envision that, right? We talked about the Packers having to look past just this next year and look into the future. We talked about it yesterday, and you asked me what if I was sitting there at 30, what would I do if Jordan Love was still available? And I said, if I was the Packers GM, I would draft Jordan Love. Obviously, the Packers were talking to Miami. There was probably somebody else talking to Miami about jumping into that spot for Jordan Love, and they felt they had to pull the trigger on a guy. Now you're sitting in that scenario where I think the Packers have already been through this, right? They had a Hall of Fame quarterback still playing very well in Brett Favre. They brought in Aaron Rodgers, who fell, really fell in the draft for reasons that he had to get fixed. He was able to sit there behind Favre, maybe not necessarily learn from Favre, right? We know about that dynamic wasn't the greatest, but he was able to sit there and learn through practicing and through the coaching staff. And that's something that Jordan Love can come in. And 2 or 3 years from now, the Packers have a decision to make. Do they continue to pay Aaron Rodgers the amount of money they need to pay him to keep him on the roster, or do they hand the keys to their first round prospect in Jordan Love, who'll be sitting here with the Packers for 5 years with a reasonable contract?
Yeah, you love both of those numbers, right? The metrics of he's got 5 years to learn the system. Realistically, isn't going to be anywhere near competing for a starting job for at least 2 to 3 seasons, depending on there was potentially if there was some injury issue to Rodgers, who's getting a little older. Lots of commentary coming in, flooding the Facebook's feed here. Let's take a look at some of these comments. Let us know how you feel about the trade up with the Miami Dolphins to pick number 26. The Packers, for those of you that are just tuning in that didn't follow the ticker, they snag Jordan Love, quarterback from Utah State. So he is the heir apparent. Is it safe to say that he's the heir apparent now at this particular stage? When was the last time we said that about a quarterback here in Green Bay?
Yeah, I mean, it's without a doubt. So I wonder if I know Aaron Rodgers was live on the McAfee show for a while for this draft. It'd be interesting to see if he was still live and what his comments were when they took Jordan Love. But it is what it is. That's what the NFL is about, right? It's about securing your future and making sure you have a good team going forward. And Aaron Rodgers is not going to be happy about not getting any additional weapons either. In any way, right? This person does not help the Packers next year almost in any way, shape, or form. If Aaron Rodgers goes down, then maybe he does help. But at this point, the Packers are taking their first round pick and investing it 100% into beyond 2021 and beyond, and kind of saying we don't need this pick for next year, which I think is going to upset a lot of Packers fans, probably upsets Aaron Rodgers. But again, it's not necessarily the coaching staff and the GM's job to make everybody happy. It's to do what they think is right and best for the organization.
Do you feel there's a sense of irony here about the position that Brian Gutekunst is in with Aaron Rodgers, which is essentially a mirror image of Ted Thompson and being able to put his footprint on this organization with a Brett Favre who was nearing the end of his tenure in Green Bay and having an opportunity at the end of that first round to draft a guy that they really liked, that they felt obviously they had a good grade on him in Aaron Rodgers. What are some of the similarities between both of those situations? Obviously, you got two Hall of Fame caliber quarterbacks, as we said, on the back nine of their careers. But again, this move, it does not help Green Bay in the upcoming season. So I think there's going to be a little bit of chatter, right, in the media and potentially with the fan base about what about our running game? What about our defensive front seven? We gave up that. What did we say in the beginning of the show, right? 285. That's the amount of yards the Packers gave up in that road loss to the San Francisco 49ers, who made their own moves. The Niners, some would argue, maybe leapfrogged Green Bay in terms of the power rankings, the NFC, by drafting an impact wide receiver. Green Bay maybe feels like there's another guy that's available for them in round two. Do you think Green Bay goes wide receiver in the second round, given that Patrick Green's probably not available at the 60th pick?
Yeah, I think what this tells us is the Packers feel really strongly about this being a strong wide receiver crew, and they feel like there's either somebody they can get at 62, or they're willing and ready to move up in the second round to grab a receiver that they like. We don't know if the Packers are planning on trying to move up in the early second round to grab T. Higgins or Michael Pittman or Denzel Mims or one of those guys that's still out there and using up some of this capital that they built up with the 10 picks available. We don't know yet what they gave up to move up these couple spots here. So the other thing I think this tells us is the Packers feel pretty good about their inside linebacker free agent signing. So they probably think that Christian Kirksey's a guy who's going to step in and start for them, and they feel pretty good about that. We've been sitting here thinking that maybe they need to go linebacker, but obviously the Packers feel that they signed Kirksey. They feel if he can stay healthy, he's probably the guy that fits the mold what they can do there. So again, there's a lot of offensive tackles that might be available, and there's a lot of wide receivers that might be available in the second round. And don't forget, one of the best left tackles in the NFL, David Bakhtiari, was a fourth round pick for the Packers. So as people, like I said, they get all excited about the first round picks and they fall in love with the first round picks. Those are the guys they tend to know more. It's a lot of times it's that second, third, fourth, fifth round guys who go on and become the cornerstones of their team.
Yeah, great perspective. David Bakhtiari was a fourth round. What is that? That's a day three selection. So, he's potentially an all pro candidate the rest of the way for him as a bookend left tackle. It's interesting to me how we're sitting in the same spot we were back 16, 15 years ago when the Packers drafted Aaron Rodgers. I spent some time on the West Coast and I actually had a chance to see Aaron Rodgers play in college at California, Berkeley. And I remember thinking to myself, leaving one of those games, if the Niners don't draft this guy number one overall, they're making a huge mistake. I'm not an NFL scout. I wasn't crunching tape at that time in my career. I just kind of started out in my own experience as a sports writer. It's interesting to see the comparisons between Aaron Rodgers and where he is now. And Brian Gutekunst is obviously looking at this from a long perspective, right? The long game. Jordan Love is a guy that I think they're looking at as, he's the heir apparent. It just feels very strange to say that, given that we've only had two other players start at quarterback since 1993. So interesting question. Amber from Butler has a comment for us on the Facebook. She's watching the show tonight. Double Coverage Radio's NFL Draft show covering all things Green Bay Packers. There's the answer to the Green Bay question that was asked last night. She loves the pick of Jordan Love. She loves the love, loves her some love. Thanks for the comment on that, Amber. Again, Jordan Love, he's got all the tools, right? We talked about it last night. Probably his biggest issue is he struggles with zone coverages. He's got a cannon of an arm. He can squeeze the throws into the tight windows. What's the biggest risk with a guy like Jordan Love? I know we see the interceptions on paper. What are you worried about if you're an offensive coordinator and you have to bring him into this system, Dave?
I think we broke down Love a lot in our pre-draft show yesterday. I think the biggest things that people see with Love is a lot of it is mechanical and technique. And we talked about being a perfect situation for him to come into some place where he doesn't have to start right away. He can get those things fixed up. There's a lot of people that said Aaron Rodgers fell for similar reasons, right, with technique. And if you look at Aaron Rodgers last year at California to what he was like when he started with the Packers, became a starter, you'll see a much different guy from a technique standpoint. So this gives Love the ability to come in somewhere, get some of those things that are weaknesses right now and turn them into strengths. And again, he's where the NFL is going towards with quarterbacks, right? A guy that can do things with his feet in addition to with his hands and with his arm. He's that guy. He's the Lamar Jackson, the Patrick Mahomes, the guys that are really doing well in the NFL right now. He fits that model. Is he going to live up to those kind of guys? That's yet to be seen. But he does
Right.
fit the model. People are going that way.
Yeah, what's the likelihood, the percentages of Green Bay drafting a third consecutive NFL Hall of Famer? I don't know the numbers on that. I don't think we have a comparison sample size to look at. Jeff Wales, who's watching the broadcast of Double Coverage's NFL Draft live show, talking all Packers, all NFL, on what I think is probably the best day of the new year sports-wise, where it's also the only thing going on sports-wise for a lot of us. So it's a pretty fun night for everybody for the next 3 days. He writes into the show, Patrick Queen was the pick. Yeah, so he's obviously not thrilled with the pick of Jordan Love to back up Aaron Rodgers, that it doesn't help the roster. Jeff, thanks for the view of the show. Thanks for the comment, and we appreciate that. Talk a little bit about Patrick Queen. We kind of know him in terms of being a named player. I know we just said Christian Kirksey is probably the guy. Oren Burks is probably just a player at this point. Has some durability issues at linebacker. Obviously, this coaching staff felt that they got a steal with Christian Kirksey, who didn't always live up to expectations, but he's kind of had his own issues with battling health and staying available.
Yeah, I think it definitely. If we thought that inside linebacker, as Packers fans looking from the outside of the organization, that was a position of need and something they should address early on. The Packers obviously thought different. Kirksey's been really, really good. He just hasn't been able to stay on the field. So they're putting a lot of eggs in the basket of saying if he does stay healthy and he's the guy that will do the same kind of things that Ken Murray or Patrick Queen can do, and they've already signed him. So they sit here thinking that they are solved that problem with Burks and Kirksey, and maybe they're going to try to get some backup. And we talked about Summers too. We both liked Summers last year, had a really good preseason. He's another guy that maybe they think between those three guys, they'll get two guys that can start and play. I think a lot of us are a little bit disappointed that Queen was out there. He's the guy that we didn't know was going to fall. Maybe we got to trade up to get him, and he was sitting there. He's still sitting there at 28. It looks like Jordan Brooks just went, so another outside linebacker, inside linebacker, tweener guy, really good athlete. Patrick Queen's still there. We might see Patrick Queen sitting there at 30, and they traded up to get Jordan Love. So again, I don't think you're going to have a lot of very happy Packer fans in the morning looking at Jordan Love. I do think they might take it a little better knowing what happened with Aaron Rodgers, and they took it when the Packers drafted Aaron Rodgers. But definitely, it's not something like we just talked about. It's not something that's going to help them for next year. It's something that they're kicking the bucket down the road and putting some more stock into the future as opposed to right now.
Yeah, they're definitely not going to help. Jason Patrick writes into the show. I think they could have waited a year to pick a quarterback early in the infamous ... Again, this kind of boils down to, right, the availability of some talent next year. Obviously, this scouting and personnel department in Green Bay, they know the name players that are going to be available. Unless you're picking number one overall and you're grabbing the guy out of Clemson, the quarterback class just isn't nearly as deep. Green Bay has to have seen something that they really liked with Jordan Love to be able to take the risk to say, more or less, this is just essentially a statement. It's not even a veiled statement, right? To Aaron Rodgers saying, we're not trying to help you again this year. We're trying to take care of what we see in the long game. And I think down the road, ideally, this could potentially work out for Green Bay, just given what we've seen on tape and sort of the measurables and what he brings to a team. But Jordan Love is a very raw prospect. He's had some issues with, consistency. He struggles with some of those things. Ideally, he has an opportunity to learn. That's the best asset right in this scenario, right, Dave?
Yeah, definitely. We talked yesterday about Jordan Love. I don't want to see him go into a situation where he's like a savior of a franchise. He has to come in and start right away. Like Joe Burrow with Cincinnati, right? I think Love has some stuff he's got to work through and work out from a mechanic standpoint, from a footwork standpoint, and stuff that he's able to do. And you talk about reading the defenses and things like that, and the level of competition he faced at Utah State. He's got the ability now to come in and again, not necessarily learn from Rodgers, right? We don't know how Aaron Rodgers is going to take it. We hope maybe he takes it a little bit better than Favre, and maybe he does put a shoulder on him and try to teach him the way and show him some stuff. But at minimum, he's going to get the coaching. He's going to see Aaron Rodgers do things, and he's going to learn that way. And by the time before, hopefully, fingers crossed, something doesn't happen to Aaron Rodgers from an injury perspective. By the time that Jordan Love is called him on to be the starting quarterback for the Packers, he's improved greatly. He's fixed those things that were weaknesses, and he can continue, the stretch that the Packers have had since Brett Favre, all these years of having really quality quarterback play.
Yeah, I would agree. I think part of it is, people are sitting here thinking just a couple months ago we were a couple of plays away in the running game, in the defensive side of stopping the running game from being in a Super Bowl. And you got to wonder if Aaron Rodgers is watching this from quarantine somewhere in Southern California with Danica Patrick. What are you thinking if you're Aaron Rodgers? Take us through the mind of the future Hall of Famer.
Yeah, I definitely, Aaron Rodgers, I think he seems to be somebody that sees the long game a little bit, maybe more than Brett Favre was worried about it at his time. But, Aaron Rodgers he made a comment that it's been 15 years since Javon Walker pickup that the Packers have taken any kind of perimeter skill player in the first round. So he's like, that would be nice. And Aaron Rodgers is kind of the king of the passive aggressive comments. He's really good at that. So that I took that kind of as a knock against the Packers organization that, hey, you haven't got me any help in the first round. Here's a first round where there's probably going to be a lot of guys available. Let's go get me somebody, right? And then not only do they not go get him somebody, they get his future, tentatively his future replacement. So I don't necessarily think that Aaron Rodgers is going to be really happy about that. But ultimately, I do think that he's somebody that's a little more introspective than maybe Favre was at that time in his career, and he can see that, hey, he doesn't have a ton of time left, right? And if Tom Brady can leave New England Patriots, Aaron Rodgers can leave the Packers. You look at Brady and Montana and Joe Namath and a lot of guys, and Johnny Unitas, and some of these great quarterbacks who ended up having to leave because they weren't ready when the team's ready. And I think if you follow NFL for a long time, generally the team is the one who decides when they're done with you, and that's kind of really the way it works out. Not everybody gets the John Elway walk into the sunset at the end of their career, right? More often than not, you see Jerry Rice in the Raiders uniform. You see Tom Brady in the Buccaneers uniform, and you see guys in uniforms, and you kind of forget that it even happened until you go back and look, when they go into the Hall of Fame, and you go, oh, yeah, he did play for that team, and I kind of forgot about it. But,
Right.
looks like that might be something, Brett Favre with the Jets. So that might be something we're looking at 2 or 3 years down the road. when Aaron Rodgers might be hoisting another jersey outside of a Packers jersey. I definitely don't think at this point a contract extension is in the works for him, as he talked about maybe having one more contract with the Packers.
Yeah, he did. He talked. He's talked extensively about it the last couple months prior to the whole shifting landscape with the health and wellness of the coronavirus. That now it's affected our sports world. He's said specifically almost that he wanted to play into his quote unquote late 40s, which I think just given the way the athletes train these days and how they can take care of their diet and their nutrition planning and just the off-season work they put in, he strikes me as a guy that potentially could fit into that mold. Definitely more athletic than a Tom Brady, and Tom Brady is still going strong, early in his 40s. I think Tom Brady's kind of the bar, right? As you set that bar for the player. But the reality is, I get a little bit of a flutter in my heart when I think, what if there's a possibility now in the next 3 seasons that Aaron Rodgers is suiting up for the Minnesota Vikings? That potential scenario, while not guaranteed, there's stuff like that that all of a sudden now is part of the mainstream conversation around the organization. A big takeaway for me, just my own personal perspective about this, having been around sports for as long as I have and following Green Bay for as long as I have, I would have preferred to see them wait one more year for a quarterback and get them maybe a piece or two from an impact perspective that could put them over the top and get him a second Super Bowl. This definitely does not help them in that situation.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at Twitter here and seeing some different things. I see, Ian Kenyon's a Packers writer, and he just posted Aaron Rodgers' cap numbers for the next 4 years. And the Packers aren't looking to cut Aaron Rodgers anytime soon. But his last year of his contract is 2023. His dead money cap number for that year is only 2.85 billion. So, realistically, you're probably thinking, as it goes now, unless something crazy happens with Jordan Love, we got 3 more years of Aaron Rodgers in the Packers, and after that, it's going to be the Jordan Love show, and we're probably going to see Aaron Rodgers playing somebody else after 2022.
Yeah, I think it's pretty realistic that Aaron Rodgers is playing football somewhere in 3 to 5 years, if not longer. Now I'm starting to wonder if it's going to be in Green Bay. So the naysayers, some of them that are closer to our heart that we'd like to acknowledge, probably happy that they drafted Jordan Love. We'll see how that works out. Probably, obviously, far too early to tell on paper if it was the right decision. Meanwhile, across the country, over into the West Coast Conference time zone, the Seattle Seahawks picked Jordan Brooks, the outside linebacker from Texas Tech. You alluded to that on Twitter, and then Baltimore doing Baltimore things and picking up an impact linebacker, probably the best remaining linebacker in the class, Patrick Queen from LSU. Jeff Wales, if you're still watching, he is now a Baltimore Raven. Sorry to have to tell you that over the broadcast, but great pickup for Baltimore. They do great things. They just seem to fill in pieces, right? Baltimore is sort of linebacker central. They've had experience with those players over the course of their franchise history. Where do you see Patrick Queen fitting into that defense? I know we don't need to talk about the specific namesake guys. Is he a player that would have stepped in and been, and made Oren Burks expendable at the end of camp this year? Is he a guy that moves that moves Curtis Bolton and Ty Summers to a different position? How do you see the impact there from that perspective?
Yeah, I definitely think Patrick Queen is the guy that's going to come into Baltimore and fill the role really well that they've kind of established since they took Ray Lewis. They've had those good athletic linebackers. I think he fits that mold. I'm not saying he's going to be any kind of a player that Ray Lewis is, but he fits the mold of the current new age inside linebacker, the guy that's sideline to sideline, athletic guy, can do a lot of different things on the field. So he's definitely a guy. Had the Packers took him, he would have stepped in and really pushed to be one of the best guys on the roster and push Kirksey and Burks to be a starter from day one. Unfortunately, he's going to be a Baltimore Raven, and the Packers have Jordan Love. So that's the stuff we have to look for to see if the Packers go wide receiver or linebacker here in the second round.
It'll be interesting down the road to see what kind of trademarks are available for Jordan Love. Loving me some love. I love the Packers. Love time USA, making sweet love. All sorts of great scenarios if it ends up working out that way. Um, Jason Patrick, again, he did say that on Twitter and on our Facebook feed. He says, I think they could have waited a year to pick a quarterback. He came early, so definitely would agree with that. I'm definitely on the side of the fans on this one. Jordan Love obviously doesn't help the organization out. Jordan Love and Aaron Rodgers are not going to be playing at the same time. Hopefully, Jordan Love's not playing anytime soon. But the irony here, right, is we said the same thing about Aaron Rodgers 15 seasons ago. So It'll be very interesting to follow. Fascinating storyline coming out of 1265 Lombardi Avenue. I'd love to be a fly on the wall solo in the basement of Brian Gutekunst in his decision. That begs the question, Dave. How much input does the staff have in this situation, given that everybody is so far apart virtually? Was it a call, do you think, Gutekunst saying, hey, if Jordan Love's available mid to late 20s, I'm going up to call, and it's his decision. Obviously, he's the final say in those scenarios. Do you think it was as simple as picking up the phone and making a call to South Beach, Miami?
Yeah, we definitely we looked at, we were talking about the Packers trading up opportunities. We thought Miami was a team that was been that's their third pick. They're looking at a team that has a lot of different needs. So the more draft picks they can get, the better. They've already drafted 2 first-round picks. Just from a salary cap perspective, it made sense for them to drop down a little bit more if they could and gain some more capital. So definitely was a spot that we thought would be there. We talked about people trying to more than likely if Jordan Love was available there at the end of the first round, that teams are going to try to move up and get him. So obviously the Packers knew that there was other teams. They're guaranteed it wasn't just the Packers looking to move up. The reason they leapfrogged all those teams is because they knew Miami was dealing. I knew there was teams looking to move up from probably the second round into that spot to grab a guy. And you would think that most likely LaFleur and the staff, along with Gutekunst and his staff, had numerous meetings, even though nobody's getting together, numerous meetings and Zoom meetings and things like that, to where they felt really strongly that if Jordan Love was available at some point, they were going to pull the trigger on him, go for him. Probably similar conversations to when the Packers took Aaron Rodgers, right? And if this guy falls for whatever reason, we're going to go get him because he's just that too good to pass up. Some people have said that Jordan Love has the strongest arm in the whole draft, and he's the most athletic quarterback in the whole draft. And you start looking at all his pluses, and again, we talked about it yesterday. If you can fix the few weaknesses, the footwork, the mechanics, and the anticipation stuff and reading defenses, and you can fix that and add it to the strengths that he has with the arm strength and the mobility and the stuff he can do with his legs, you have that world class type of new age quarterback that can kill you with his legs, kill you with his arms, and the Packers might be set at quarterback for another 15 years, 15, 20 years than they already have been.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. A lot of people probably don't remember this, but Aaron Rodgers had a 3-quarter throwing motion when he came out of Berkeley that he had to really rework. He's changed his whole dynamic. If you were to see a picture of him at his first rookie OTA or minicamp versus what he throws like today, it's like a whole different player. How much do you think mechanics has to do with a player's success? Obviously, quarterback is the name position. He's got all of everything you look for from a tools perspective. He's got a huge arm. What do you think is the most important element of his game that he needs to take care of? I know you mentioned footwork, reading defenses. What is he going to have an opportunity to really focus on with this coaching staff?
I think the biggest thing they're going to do, and you look at NFL, right? All the guys are really great athletes, and they're all really great college players. Even the guys who are free agent pickups are the best players on their team in college. So as you go from youth football to high school to college to the pros, it just gets smaller and smaller amount of great athletes that are there, right? So everybody's really, really good, and it's those little things that put you over the edge. It's the work ethic, it's the mechanics, it's the technique, and the understanding of the scheme and the logistics of playing the game. So watching the film, being a kind of a quarterback guy myself, watching a lot of quarterbacks film, I really like Jordan Love's film. I like Jordan Love's film better than some other guys. I think Jordan Love's probably going to be a better college quarterback than Herbert. And I'm not a huge, to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of Tua myself. Actually, I don't project him to have probably a really long and really good NFL career. I think if I was sitting at a GM, I like Burrow and then I like Love as the top 2 quarterbacks in the draft, and I like Hurts really pushing those guys as well. So I think Love has the opportunity to come in, fix the mechanic stuff. His motion, it seems all right, but it's really the footwork stuff. It might have been a point where they just didn't coach him hard enough, and it's something that Coach LaFleur will have to get on. But fix that footwork and that mechanic stuff, mainly from the feet up, and I think you could have a really really good quarterback on your hands, and again put the Packers in a position to have maybe the first team ever to have back to back to back. Maybe not Hall of Fame, but 3 really really good quarterbacks. The San Francisco went from Montana the Young, but then they fell off the map for quite a few years, and I think teams have seen what happens when you don't have a plan and you kind of just keep pushing through to try to win that last Super Bowl with the guy you got. You don't have a
Right.
plan for quarterback, you fall off the map in this league without a plan at quarterback.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a quarterback-driven league. I understand the philosophy from the personnel and scouting department. I again, as I said, I'm not a huge proponent of the pick. I understand why they did it, but I'd also like to see Aaron Rodgers win another Super Bowl, and this isn't going to help him do that. Meanwhile, while we are talking about the future at signal caller for the Packers in 5 to 7 seasons from now, the Tennessee Titans do Tennessee Titans things under head coach Mike Vrabel, and they draft Isaiah Wilson, big offensive tackle from Georgia. So that still means, right? A couple of those guys we talked about yesterday on the pre-draft show are available at tackle. Green Bay with 30 picks, picking at the 30th slot in the second round. How do you feel about offensive line? What position, as we start to wrap up the first round coverage here, do you think Green Bay is going to target with their couple of picks on day two?
Yeah, I definitely think that the Packers are probably going to go offensive tackle or wideout in round two. The one thing I wouldn't throw out is the Packers trading up either into the bottom of this first round for one of those guys or really early in the second round. So the Packers have picked, but I wouldn't go to bed yet until this first round's over. Gutekunst has proven that he's aggressive. He's going to come after what he wants to come after. They targeted Jordan Love. But if you look at guys, we talk about TJ Watt a lot, right? The guy they passed on, TJ Watt. What are guys that are sitting out there right now that have been linked to the Packers? Mims is still out there. T. Higgins is still out there from wideout perspective. Ezra Cleveland, Josh Jones are still out there from offensive tackle position. Patrick Queen, if they had moved up, was available. If you're just looking at who's there at 30 right now, some of these guys, who could be the TJ Watt or the DJ Metcalf, the guy that Packer fans are looking at year after year saying, we could have had him. If Jordan Love pans out and he's a great player, nobody's going to question that. But if Jordan Love doesn't pan out and Denzel Mims is a Pro Bowl player for many years, people are going to look back and go, we could have had him, but we traded up for that stinking Jordan Love guy. Look what happened.
Right. Yeah. If he turns out to be, the second coming of Jay Cutler, all potential, all game tape, all practice squad stuff, all measurables on paper, then it's probably not going to be a win. Meanwhile, here's Miami Dolphins in the slot that the Packers formerly occupied at 30. I'm thinking if I'm a betting guy, and I might be, I think the smart money is on them taking a running back here. How much do you think it's going to hurt Packer fans in their green and gold heart if they take Jonathan Taylor with this pick? Is it T.J.
Yeah,
Watt scenario all over again?
yeah. I don't know if it's as bad as a TJ Watt scenario because at the time the Packers had a huge need for pass rusher too when TJ Watt came out. They had a cornerback need. They took Kevin King. They thought he'd be the long lane cornerback that teams are going for these days. But the Packers don't have a need at running back. Aaron Jones is really, really good. Jamal Williams is good. So I don't think it stings Badger fans so much if Jonathan Taylor goes here and the Packers could have had him, because I don't think there's a huge need. It just was one of those things with the TJ Watt year where the Packers had a huge need. Here's this Badger. Not only is he a big time Badger, he's the brother of JJ Watt, and we know what kind of success he had had at the NFL at that time. It felt like a perfect world scenario for Wisconsin football fans to get a position the Packers needed, to get a former Badger, and the former Badger who happened to be part of the famous Wisconsin homegrown Watt family. So I don't think it'd be as big of a thing if he goes as it was when TJ Watt got overlooked.
Yeah, I'm literally hanging off the edge of my seat here, wondering what Miami is going to do as I follow the draft cast over here on ESPN. Miami obviously taking their sweet time. I wonder, if you're Brian Flores, second year head coach of the Dolphins, you're obviously entertaining trade offers, picking this far back again in the end of the first round. If you're a team looking to move up, what's the possibility of Brian Gutekunst saying, "Hey, we don't need our first rounder in 2021. We want to trade back into the first part of this round and maybe grab another guy"? Who do you think would be the player in that scenario if they don't end up moving out of the 62nd pick tomorrow?
I think wideout's the spot. I don't necessarily see them moving up here for an offensive lineman. Like we said, it's not a huge need for next year. They've already thrown their first round pick to a future year, so I don't think they can afford to do that again with an offensive line spot. But I definitely think that with the amount of good receivers that are on the board, if we don't see them run on here late in the first round, I definitely think tomorrow with the second round, we're going to see a run on wide receivers where you're going to see Mims gone, and you're going to see T. Higgins gone, you're going to see Pittman out of USC gone, Chenault gone, Hamler out of Penn State. There's going to be a run on those guys. So I think the Packers might be a player in moving up to get to one of those guys, whether it is maybe here in the first round or it's early in the second round.
Yeah, I would agree. I think Denzel Mims is probably the guy. I wonder, maybe the dream scenario happens here, and Green Bay is able to draft the quarterback of the future and still land an impact receiver with their first pick in the second round. So all sorts of intriguing potential possibilities here along those lines. Dave, do we have any opportunities here to see who's picking for the last couple slots in the first round as we start to wrap up the show?
Yeah, I mean we got three spots left, right? You have Dolphins and the Vikings who both traded back into those spots, right? And then you have the Chiefs. Obviously, Super Bowl champs, wild card, right? They can almost do whatever they want at that spot. They don't have any huge holes. Minnesota, I'm really thinking is looking for a DB right there. Winfield Jr. still there. Xavier McKinney, who was thought to be a top 15 pick, still sitting out there. Minnesota's probably looking more corner than they are safety, so who knows? And then Dolphins, like we talked about, really probably thinking running back or again, best available player. Dolphins are on their third first round pick. They got the most picks in the draft. They just gained another pick by trading back here, so they could be in a position to say, hey, we're going to take the top guy on our board. Maybe they take Xavier McKinney because he's the top guy left on their board, and they wait for running back into the next round. They do have one of the earlier picks in the second round, and there hasn't been a running back taken yet.
Yeah, in terms of running backs that are available, Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift would be the guys, and maybe J.K. Dobbins. Do you see them fitting into a backfield if they're available or mid day two with Green Bay at that 60th pick? Is it more attractive for them to look into that if they are available then?
Yeah, I think if the Packers do sit still at 62, I really think the Packers are probably going to try to make a move and make sure they get a wide receiver at that role. I definitely don't think that LaFleur and Gutekunst want to piss Aaron Rodgers off. They're not trying to make him angry. So they felt like there's something they had to do to make it happen and get Jordan Love. They thought he was a quarterback of the future and he can solidify that. But I think they definitely have anticipated and think they need to bring another wide receiver in. So, but if they do sit pat, they can't make a deal. They can't find something that fits. And one of those guys is still there. I think they take a good, hard, long look at grabbing one of those guys. Running back is not necessarily viewed as a great weapon for the quarterback, right? You want somebody for him to throw the ball down the field, but a running back is a good weapon for the quarterback nonetheless.
Yeah, I would agree with you. We're going to be starting to wind up our show, wind down after a very eventful first round of the 2020 NFL Draft. A couple more picks to go. Don't forget to check out Double Coverage Radio on Facebook. We will be doing our full post-draft show covering rounds 2 through 7 on Tuesday night, April 28th at 7:30 p.m. Central. Looking forward to that show. In terms of needs the rest of the way, Dave, give us a couple of positions you think Green Bay is going to dip in multiple times over the next couple of days of the draft.
So I definitely think we're going to see at least one or two wideouts, right? So they're going to pick one, whether they pick in the second round, or third round, or fourth round. We're definitely going to see a wide receiver or maybe two. You're going to see a couple offensive linemen. You're going to see an offensive tackle for sure, and possibly an interior guy. So those positions are probably spots that you're going to get for sure. And then you're going to look at maybe a tight end, maybe a corner, possibly a safety for guys that are looking to be backup roles or developmental guys down the road. And then you're probably, as Packers have been proven to have taken over the past few years, is you're going to get an interior lineman, and you're probably going to get an inside linebacker at some point. But again, at this point, I think the Packers probably feel pretty good about where they're at with the guys that they have at inside linebacker. So again, looking for somebody that can be developmental and kind of come through for them down the road.
Yeah, I would agree. I think offensive line, somebody in the perimeter at wide receiver, probably going to be the way to go. Also, breaking out of Miami with that 30th pick in the first round is Igbinoga, the cornerback from Auburn. He was graded as a sort of fringe first round guy. So obviously, Jonathan Taylor and other running backs still available if you're interested in dipping back with the last two picks in the first round. And Minnesota, which was involved in the trade with the San Francisco 49ers, is now picking at 31. So interesting scenario here with the Niners. What do you do if you're Minnesota here, picking at the end of the first round?
I definitely think Minnesota's in a position where they need defensive back help. So, the one caveat is Miami grabbed a corner, the next best corner available. I think Minnesota's looking long and hard. They needed a wideout. They went and got him. We saw that coming. But the other spot they really need is defensive back help. So they've had some struggles there. They had some guy, Xavier Rhodes, is not quite the player he used to be. Trey Waynes has struggled the last couple of years. Another local guy, Wisconsin guy. Good career, but he's been struggling the last year. So I think that's the position that they look at as well as possibly being a big position to need. The other thing that Minnesota looking for is possibly grabbing one of those offensive tackles. They have some need at offensive line as well. So I think those are probably the two spots they're looking at, is either getting somebody in that defensive backfield or solidifying that offensive line.
So they're not going to grab a running back given their situation with Dalvin Cook. So I'm thinking Jonathan Taylor does not end up in Minnesota playing for the Vikings. I'd say that there's probably a 0% chance of that happening as we start to wind down the show tonight. Just wanted to say thank you to all of the members of the audience who watched the show. We are broadcasting here live from the Butler, Wisconsin studios. Dave, it's been a pleasure tonight as we wrap it up. Everything Green Bay Packers related. Give me just a real quick snapshot of your perspective on the first round. Did it go according to plan? Are you all that surprised? What do you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I definitely think we talked about teams having their draft board, probably all kind of the same guys. So I think if you look through the picks that were taken here in the first round and you play it back to all the mock drafts and all the experts drafts, you're only going to see a couple names pop up that you maybe didn't anticipate seeing. So more often than not, it's just guys that are slotting into where teams see they fit really well. So I think all the smoke and mirrors of the last couple of weeks and all the curveballs being thrown the last couple of weeks by teams to try to make sure their guy was available, just kind of were what they were, curveball and smoke, and it played out very similar to what people thought it was. It looks like probably the biggest curveball was done by the Packers in trading up, not for a wideout, not for a game-breaking linebacker, but for a quarterback, right? So I think nationally, what you'll see tomorrow morning when you wake up is the biggest curveball, the biggest story is going to be Packers draft quarterback in the first round. Outside of the top five and Burrow and Chase Young and Okuda and that stuff going, the biggest thing you're going to see that people are going to be up in arms about and concerned about, and you turn on the Cowherds and the first takes and stuff tomorrow morning, it's going to be, can you believe the Packers? I can't wait to see what Stephen A. Smith has to say about that with the Packers taking Aaron Rodgers' future replacement here. So I think that being Packer fans here and being Packer kind of oriented for the draft, at least right now, it's going to be something that we're going to get to read a lot of articles and see a lot of people talk about the Packers' first round draft pick because of what they did.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I'm going to avoid national social media and sports media for a couple of days as I kind of just take in the draft the next couple of days. So just want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight. Dave, always an amazing experience here with you as the co-host sitting up in Oshkosh. Thanks for tuning in to Double Coverage Radio tonight, our coverage of the first round. Going to wrap up here. Dave, any final thoughts before we throw it back to Facebook and social media?
No, I don't think so. So it's exciting. Again, Packer fans might not be super happy about what happened, but just start thinking about some of your favorite Packers and what round they were drafted in, and feel really good about what the Packers have left to do with 8 or 9 more picks left in this draft.
Yeah, Green Bay has 9 more picks, 9 more rolls of the dice to try and help out this squad, and we will wind it down. Thanks for tuning in tonight. And the heir apparent was drafted number 26 overall, Jordan Love, quarterback out of Utah State. As always, come back to Double Coverage Radio on Facebook. From the preps to the pros, all football all the time. Have a great night, and we will see you next time.